Welcome to the podcast. I hope you enjoy my stories. Van Helsing, Shadows of the Masters, by James Bryan Love. Copyright 2025. All rights reserved. Now let's get into this original gripping supernatural story.
London's fog choked the gas lamps, turning the streets into blurred corridors of yellow light and shadow. Chimneys loomed like jagged teeth, belching smoke that carried the acrid scent of burning coal across the cobblestones. Steam kit from vents embedded in the streets, curling around exposed pipes and iron grates, distorting shapes and hiding motion. The city's heartbeat was relentless. The hammering of factories, the clatter of carts on wet stone, the occasional cry of a street vendor lost to the fog. Amid the haze, a figure moved with unnerving precision. Clothing dark as midnight absorbed the dim light, and a leather coat brushed his knees as his boots struck the cobblestones with quiet authority. In his hand a small device ticked, brass and etched metal turning in miniature harmony, its crystalline core pulsing faintly. Gears clicked, a subtle rhythm against the clamor of the city. The device whispered guidance and warning alike, its coded signals both promise and trap. A faint scuttling sound reached him from a nearby alley. The device's pulse quickened, and the figure pivoted, one hand brushing a concealed blade from his belt. The rat bolted from the shadows, and he did not flinch, but his eyes caught a glint of something unnatural. Small metallic limbs, moving with precision far beyond vermin. Clockwork spiders, tiny yet lethal in design, skittered along the wall toward him. A flash of movement from the fog heralded a human agent, dagger drawn, eyes cold and calculating. "Stop," a voice hissed. "You're not supposed to be here." The figure moved before the words fully landed, a blur of motion. Steel met steel as the dagger struck, deflected by a bracer hidden beneath the coat sleeve. A kick sent the agent sprawling into the alley wall. Gears clanking from the mechanical spiders as they scattered. The figure adjusted the device again, noting the patterns of the attack. Subtle hints etched into its surface suggested more than random threats. Someone had anticipated his path, mapped his reactions, and laid traps in advance. The device ticked, pulsing faintly, indicating movement further down the street. Smoke from the nearest factory vent formed a screen, hiding the shape of another assailant. Without hesitation, the figure lunged, landing silently on the second attacker's shoulders, twisting with strength unnatural to ordinary men, and slammed the man into a stack of barrels. Wooden splinters flew, a hiss of leaking steam adding to the chaos. "Persistent," the man groaned, struggling beneath the figure's weight. The figure ignored him, scanning the environment. Shadows moved atop rooftops, and the faint gleam of mechanical claws traced along the edges of windows. Every footstep, every breath, was measured against threats both human and monstrous. From a nearby doorway, a low growl rumbled. A creature stepped into the dim light, limbs disproportionate, its eyes glowing faint red. Steam kicked from small tubes along its spine, an amalgam of flesh and machine. It lunged with unnatural speed. The figure's blade flashed, catching the creature mid-leap, slicing tendons and gears alike. Sparks erupted where metal met metal, mingling with a hiss of escaping hydraulic fluid. "You can't kill what you don't understand," a voice whispered from above. Another shadow shifted, vanishing into the fog. The device in his hand vibrated, directing attention to the rooftops. Two figures, armed with whips tipped with electrified wire, descended. Their landing kicked up puddles of grimy water, sending reflections of gas lamps dancing across wet stone. Movement was instantaneous. Blades swung, limbs twisted, and each strike was calculated with the precision of centuries of practice. Steel connected with flesh, with clockwork limbs, and sparks flew from the arcane etchings along the device as if it resonated with the chaos. A mechanical leg kicked out from a fallen automaton, smashing into the street, sending a cascade of debris across the alley. The figure ducked, rolling under a blade, and brought the weapon up in a precise arc. A hiss, a metallic shriek, and one attacker collapsed, convulsing from contact with the electrified whip. The second faltered, misjudging the timing, and was thrown into a stack of crates. Wood splintered. The smell of charred metal filled the air, and the fog swallowed the scene again. Through it all, the device pulsed, guiding, warning, whispering in a language of gear and light. Its coded signals spoke of traps ahead, of corridors lined with the twisted remains of failed automatons and misguided apprentices of the master. Each pulse was a breadcrumb, leading to a confrontation that would test more than strength. It would test endurance, intellect, and the ability to see beyond the veil of the city's smoke and mirrors. A carriage rattled past, the driver unaware of the shadows flitting above and around him. One shadow paused to observe, perched atop a lamppost, eyes scanning the street below. A fleeting voice reached down. "You move too fast for them, too fast for the masters." The figure adjusted the device again, its small gears whirring in alignment. The fog thickened, curling around iron fences, industrial vents, and leaning brick facades. A sudden clang drew attention. A falling sign, twisted iron, barely missing the figure. A trap had been sprung, perhaps a warning from someone watching too closely, or a test designed to measure his reflexes. Reflexes he possessed more keen than any human could endure. Limbs moved without hesitation, blade slicing through cable, sending sparks into the murky air. The creature with the glowing eyes rose from the street, partially repaired, twisted metal sewn back into its body with crude stitches. It lunged with renewed ferocity, and the figure sidestepped, grabbing the creature's mechanical arm and twisting, hearing the scream of metal tearing through flesh. The alley smelled of oil, blood, and smoke, a combination that would make most men gag. Not him. A voice called from deeper within the mist, "You cannot change the pattern. You are already in the web." The figure's head tilted slightly, acknowledging the warning, if only in observation. He adjusted the device again, decoding the next pulse. It indicated movement beyond the alley, narrow streets filled with clanging machines, shadowed warehouses, and flickering lamps. The pulse suggested urgency. The first master's presence radiated outward in ripples of activity, each subtle anomaly a clue hidden within the city's machinery and fog. Without hesitation he moved, feet silent despite the chaos around him. Overhead, gears clicked in the shadows. Small constructs, spies of the master, their tiny mechanical wings flapping like dark insects. He swung a blade with precision, cutting through winged limbs and watching them fall. Sparks flew, mingling with the mist and smoke, casting distorted reflections across broken windows. "You are persistent," another voice whispered from the rooftops, cold and amused, "but persistence alone will not save you." The figure did not respond. Words were unnecessary. Action spoke through steel and sinew, through cunning and the semi-cursed endurance of a body that had survived centuries. Each alley, each street corner, each shadowed doorway became a test of reflexes, a puzzle to solve with combat as much as intellect. The city itself was a battlefield, alive with traps, automatons, and minor monsters, all pointing toward a central design. The first master. The fog shifted, revealing the outline of a factory looming ahead, its smokestacks clawing into the night sky. Steam hissed through its vents, mixing with the mist, carrying a metallic scent that marked the convergence of industry and arcane interference. The device pulsed faster, a staccato rhythm signaling proximity. Within, faint mechanical growls and shuffles hinted at unseen threats, human, unnatural, or both. The figure paused briefly at the factory entrance, glancing at the pulsing device. Its crystalline core shone brighter, etchings vibrating faintly as if sensing the density of the traps ahead. With a measured breath he stepped forward, the clatter of his boots drowned beneath the symphony of hissing steam and grinding gears. The hunt had truly begun. Every corner of London's fog-choked streets, every shadow and every screech of metal, testified to a city at the intersection of industrial ambition and dark design. Within this chaos the figure moved, precise, lethal, and inexhaustible, guided by the intricate device, ready to face both the minor monsters and the first master whose presence loomed like a specter over the city. The streets of London hummed with hidden menace, gas lamps casting fractured pools of light across rain-slicked cobblestones. Shadows pooled in narrow alleys, shifting with the scrape of unseen mechanisms and the low growl of creatures that prowled just out of sight. The figure advanced deliberately, the small steampunk device in his hand ticking and pulsing with uneven rhythm. Each flare of its crystalline core revealed faint anomalies in the city's machinery and architecture. Subtle signs that traced the first master's influence through hidden corridors, abandoned workshops, and shadowed corners of the industrial maze. A faint clatter echoed from a nearby warehouse, the sound of gears grinding against each other. Without hesitation he slipped into the shadows, body coiled like a spring, senses stretching to catch every vibration in the fog-laden streets. Within the building, faint shapes moved, automatons crafted from brass and steel, their limbs jerking with mechanical precision. One turned sharply, a thin whip of steam unfurling from a small vent as if sensing the intruder. "Curious," a voice whispered from the darkness, human yet modulated by some device, distorted and metallic. "Not many survived this far." The figure did not pause to answer. Feet landed silently on the worn wooden floor and a blade flashed, cutting a joint on the automaton's arm. Sparks erupted as cogs and wires snapped. The device pulsed again, guiding him further into the heart of the warehouse. Each room revealed more traps, pressure plates wired to release scalding steam, swinging pendulums tipped with jagged metal, and mechanical spiders that scuttled along the beams overhead. Every obstacle was anticipated and countered with preternatural precision. A sudden hiss drew attention to a side corridor. A pair of figures emerged, cloaked and armed, their blades catching the dim light. The first moved with a practiced lunge, dagger aimed at the figure's side. Reflexes honed over centuries answered instinctively. A pivot, a catch of the wrist, and a snap that sent the dagger flying into the far wall. The second attempted a flank, only to find a foot planted squarely against his chest, throwing him backward into a stack of crates. The crates collapsed with a splintering crash, revealing a tangle of gears and small hydraulic limbs, another trap designed to slow pursuit. The device pulsed insistently, signaling the location of more subtle disturbances, unseen threads of the master's influence woven into the city's machinery. It hinted at hidden corridors beneath the factory floor, narrow passages that twisted beneath streets and warehouses. The figure followed the signals with the precision of a predator stalking prey, aware that each subtle pulse could indicate danger or opportunity. From above, a soft clinking sounded as clockwork birds descended, wings flaring, brass feathers and tiny steam vents puffing with rhythm. They circled, scanning for movement, their beady lenses reflecting the faint light. One dive-bombed, aiming for the figure's head. A swift strike with the blade sheared through metal wings and gears, sending shards clattering across the floor. "Persistent," hissed a voice from a shadowed catwalk. But persistence alone is insufficient. The figure's eyes tracked the silhouettes above. Two more automatons lurked on the beams, their mechanical limbs jerking with unnatural fluidity. A leap, a swing of the blade, and one was torn from its perch, plummeting into a vat of molten metal below. Steam hissed as the metal hissed and bubbled, filling the warehouse with heat and acrid fumes. The remaining automaton advanced, arms swinging with heavy clubs tipped with serrated edges. Timing and reflex collided in a deadly ballet. The figure dodged, parried, and countered, each strike calculated to exploit weaknesses in design and structure, sending cogs and pistons flying from the construct. "Not bad," the voice called again. "But the master's reach extends farther than you imagine." The figure ignored the taunt, moving deeper into the warehouse. The device pulsed faster, indicating hidden influences layered throughout the city. Faulty gearboxes, arcane etchings carved into support beams, faint vibrations in the floors signaling pressure plates or traps. Factories became labyrinths, warehouses twisted into mazes of shadows and noise, and secret laboratories revealed experiments half-finished, the results twisted by dark purpose. Vials of unknown liquids, arcane runes etched across machinery, and partially assembled clockwork creatures littered the rooms. A shadow shifted at the far end of the lab, a hunched humanoid figure with elongated limbs, partially mechanical, its joints clicking and whirring unnaturally. It lunged with a low grinding scream, blades extending from its wrists. The figure sidestepped, catching a wrist mid-leap and snapping it backward. Metal teeth tore through flesh and gear alike, and the hybrid creature fell to the floor, twitching as circuits sparked across its frame. Steam hissed from broken pipes overhead, filling the room with blinding mist. In that moment, two human agents emerged from hidden panels, their guns trained. They fired rapidly, bullets striking metal and wood with ricocheting clangs. Reflexes that had been sharpened over centuries allowed a swift dive to cover, followed by calculated counterattacks. A kick to one agent's chest, sending him into the machinery, gears grinding bones and metal together, and a slash that severed the second agent's weapon hand. The devices, pulse intensified, subtle vibrations guided the figure through hidden corridors, each step calculated to avoid pressure plates and more lethal traps. In narrow passageways beneath the city, mechanized guardians awaited. Spiders, serpents, and quadrupedal automatons, all designed to delay or kill. Each was met with strategy and speed, limbs moving in a symphony of violence. The creatures fell one by one, shattered brass and splintered metal littering the ground, mixing with faint trails of blood where human interference had occurred. From a grated vent above, a metallic hiss heralded the arrival of a flying construct, wings clattering with precision. The figure launched upward, vaulting off crates and swinging the blade in an arc that sliced the wings cleanly, sending sparks and smoke into the corridor. Below, more mechanical traps sprung, gears rotating rapidly, jagged edges swinging like pendulums. But anticipation and long-cultivated awareness allowed swift evasion. Each obstacle revealed not only danger, but also a map of influence. The master's touch was in the very architecture, the devices, the rhythm of the traps themselves. A muffled voice echoed through a tunnel. "You follow shadows where none exist. You cannot comprehend the web." The figure's head tilted, acknowledging the warning without hesitation. Movement remained fluid and lethal, anticipating attacks from unseen agents and creatures. Every slash, strike, and maneuver reflected centuries of experience. A mind that calculated angles and timing beyond human limits. The city itself seemed to respond, streets bending to traps and signals, machinery groaning under the weight of unseen control. Steam vents hissed to obscure movement, shadows stretched to conceal, and the pulse of the device guided, warned, and confirmed each decision. Factories, warehouses, and laboratories merged into a single sprawling gauntlet, each encounter reinforcing the figure's awareness. The first master's influence was pervasive, woven into every element of the city's industrial heart. A final series of corridors led to an abandoned foundry. Gears still rotated faintly, and a skeleton of machinery indicated prior work, now derelict yet still capable of harm. Clockwork sentinels patrolled silently, their sensors scanning for life. Without hesitation, the figure moved, exploiting blind spots and momentum. A swipe of the blade dispatched a sentinel mid-step, and another's gears seized under calculated sabotage, freezing it in place. The device pulsed, slower now, signaling proximity to the first master's immediate influence. The figure paused briefly, surveying the room. Every detail mattered, every shadow, every scrap of machinery, every whisper of movement. Each encounter so far had been both test and trail, guiding toward the master, teaching where and how the city itself had been co-opted into a network of control and danger. The hunt continued, the streets and underbelly of London alive with machinery, human threat, and minor supernatural creations. The figure moved onward, blending speed, strategy, and semi-cursed endurance into a relentless pursuit. The first master's whispers threaded through every encounter, every device, every shadow, guiding the way toward confrontation. The narrow alleys of London twisted into an unforgiving labyrinth, the wet cobblestones slick under the dim light of gas lamps. From a fire escape above, a figure dropped silently, landing with barely a whisper. Another followed, knives glinting faintly as they caught the lamplight. "Van Helsing," one hissed, voice low and laced with venom. "You should have stayed away. The masters will not forgive trespassers." Steel clanged as a knife arced toward him. Reflexes honed over centuries guided a precise parry, the blade snapping harmlessly aside. A kick to the attacker's chest sent him sprawling into a stack of barrels. Another lunged with a whip tipped in faintly glowing runes, the crack of energy slicing the alley's damp air. A twist of the wrist and the whip passed without contact, snapping against the wet stones behind. From the shadows a low guttural growl signaled the approach of a twisted creature, its form half human, half machinery. Joints fused with brass squeaked as it moved with unnatural speed. A blade met the nearest clawed limb, severing the metal graft. Sparks and blood sprayed the alley as the monster shrieked and lunged again. "You cannot survive what we send, Van Helsing," another voice shouted from the darkness, distorted by rudimentary arcane devices. Two human assailants advanced, knives flashing in synchronization. Each swing was met with anticipation. One fell to a precise counter-strike, crashing into the wall, while the other's dagger snapped mid-lunge, leaving him off balance and vulnerable. Above, a mechanical construct descended, wings unfurling brass feathers that hissed with vented steam. It dove at him. Van Helsing rolled beneath the attack, sweeping a blade in a calculated arc. The construct collapsed, its springs and cogs scattering across the stones. The device pulsed faintly, each blink revealing subtle anomalies in the city. Pressure plates hidden beneath crates, small traps rigged along the walls. Minor monsters and human agents alike were drawn to these points, each encounter testing his reflexes, intellect, and endurance. From a nearby doorway, a grotesque figure emerged, limbs twisted with metal enhancements, claws snapping. Van Helsing anticipated the strike, spinning to deliver a precise blow that shattered joints and severed grafted limbs. The creature screamed, staggering back before lunging again. Another sweep of the blade ended the assault, the alley littered with debris, broken machinery, and the twitching remains of hybrid monstrosities. "Van Helsing, you move too quickly," a voice shouted from a rooftop, releasing a chain tipped with a hook. It swung downward with lethal intent. Timing and centuries of honed reflexes allowed Van Helsing to duck beneath it. The chain struck harmlessly against the stone behind him. A leap onto a crate placed him above the attacker, and a single strike sent the man sprawling into a heap of wet crates. Another minor monster, half flesh, half clockwork, lunged from the shadows. Van Helsing sidestepped, severing mechanical limbs with fluid precision. Sparks flew, mixing with the slick of rain on the cobblestones. A second human agent attempted a desperate attack, running from the opposite end of the alley. A swift kick to the chest sent him sprawling. Before he could recover, Van Helsing delivered a precise downward strike, disarming and incapacitating him. The device pulsed, guiding him through hidden corridors beneath the streets. More minor monsters emerged from shadowed vents, their claws scraping metal grates. Each was neutralized with precise strikes, calculated movements, and preternatural endurance. Limbs were shattered, gears torn from frames, and each assailant left inoperable. From above, a mechanical bird dropped silently, wings snapping open. Van Helsing twisted mid-roll, slashing through one wing. The construct crashed into a pile of barrels with a metallic clang. Two human agents charged from the far end of the alley, knives in hand, shouting, "Van Helsing, you can't escape." Each lunge was anticipated. One assailant's blade was caught mid-strike, snapped with precise torque, sending him sprawling. The other's dagger was deflected, leaving him exposed to a kick that sent him into a stack of crates. The crates toppled, revealing a hidden trap. Spinning gears, jagged edges swinging like pendulums. Van Helsing's footwork, perfected over centuries, neutralized each hazard. Slicing through the gears where necessary to disable their movement, a low hiss signaled another minor monster approaching from a side alley. Claws scraping cobblestone, Van Helsing dodged, countered with a strike to fuse joints, and spun to catch a secondary attack from a hidden human assailant. Sparks, blood, and oil sprayed the alley as limbs and gears collided. "You can't defeat us, Van Helsing," the surviving human called, desperation creeping into his voice. The pulse from a small device on his wrist sent nearby constructs into frenzied motion. Mechanical spiders scuttled, and a flying construct swooped from above. Van Helsing's movements were fluid and precise. A kick to destabilize, a slash to destroy joints, and a roll to evade. Every attack was met with centuries of honed reflexes and unerring calculation. From the shadows, another human agent hurled a vial of luminescent liquid. It shattered on impact, spraying the ground with corrosive light. Van Helsing pivoted, striking the agent before he could flee. Limbs, both human and mechanical, collided in a deadly rhythm as the alley became a battlefield of calculated chaos. Another minor monster, its body partially grafted with brass, lunged with claws extended. Van Helsing's blade struck, severing the appendages in one motion, before following with a kick that destabilized the creature. Sparks and fluid sprayed the cobblestones. The surviving human agents regrouped, attempting coordinated attacks, but each was anticipated, countered, and incapacitated with brutal efficiency. The device pulsed, signaling no immediate threats, yet faint residual patterns indicated more traps, minor monsters, and human operatives nearby. The organization's reach became clear: independent, efficient, and relentless. Their motives remained opaque, their moral authority absent, and Van Helsing's understanding of the city's threats deepened. One surviving agent, clutching a dagger, spat blood and hissed, "You may survive, Van Helsing, but the masters control everything." A silent step forward was the only response. The device pulsed once more, guiding him deeper into the city's web of traps, monsters, and human adversaries. Minor creatures scattered, mechanisms fell silent, and the alley returned to an eerie stillness. The hunt continued. The streets themselves were alive with hidden dangers, but Van Helsing's centuries of skill, reflexes, and endurance allowed him to press forward, relentless, toward the first master's influence. A sudden clatter from above drew his gaze to a tangle of ropes and scaffolding, where 3 human agents dangled precariously, attempting a coordinated ambush from height. Their weapons, daggers, spikes, and a small crossbow, were aimed with deadly precision. Van Helsing lunged, narrowly evading a volley of bolts, kicking one assailant back into the scaffolding. The crossbow discharged again, a bolt thudding into a nearby wall. Sparks from a misfired electrical trap danced along the wet cobblestones. A small mechanical spider scuttled along a railing, eyes glowing red, leaping toward him. A swift spin and a precise strike crushed its gears, sending fragments scattering. Another minor monster, its human form fused with brass and gears, charged from a side alley. Van Helsing intercepted with a low kick, destabilizing it, then followed with a sweeping blade across its midsection, gears grinding as it collapsed. Above, an assassin called out, "Van Helsing, you cannot survive the master's designs." He hurled a vial of noxious gas, and it hissed as it spread across the alley. Van Helsing moved like liquid, weaving between the creeping fog, striking the human agent before he could recover, shattering a dagger and sending him sprawling. The device pulsed again, guiding him toward the next cluster of threats. The alley twisted and constricted. More minor monsters surged, mechanical limbs clicking, claws scraping stone. Van Helsing moved with preternatural speed, anticipating attacks, dismantling traps, severing limbs fused with machinery, incapacitating human assailants, leaving the alley littered with broken forms of both flesh and metal. The surviving agent, bloodied and desperate, shouted one last warning, "Van Helsing, the masters are everywhere. You cannot escape them." Van Helsing's only response was the silent, deliberate step forward, his hand resting briefly on the device as it pulsed, faint light revealing residual patterns across the city's underbelly. He pressed on, unyielding, every sense alert to human and monstrous threats alike, ready to confront the next wave, his hunt far from over. The streets narrowed, funnels of steam rising from vented grates and broken pipes, curling in dense coils around rusted railings and iron scaffolds. Van Helsing's eyes flicked over every shadow, every jagged surface, as the steampunk device pulsed faintly in his hand, its crystalline core flashing with irregular rhythms that hinted at both proximity and danger. The first master was near. From a side alley, a faint metallic hiss heralded the arrival of a mechanical guardian, a towering humanoid construct fused with brass and darkened steel. Pistons hissed as it moved, gears grinding audibly, while lenses glowed crimson. Van Helsing, a distorted voice, growled through a speaker embedded in its chest. "You should not have come." Van Helsing pivoted, rolling to avoid a sweeping strike. Sparks flew as metal clanged against stone. A blade bipped from his belt, severing the construct's lower arm in one precise arc. Hydraulic fluid hissed as the limb fell, and the machine staggered, but its momentum carried it forward. A swift kick destabilized it, sending it into a stack of crates which toppled with a crash, scattering debris across the alley. Another figure emerged from the shadows, human in form but enhanced with rudimentary arcane devices. Dagger in hand, he lunged with deadly precision. Van Helsing anticipated, sidestepping and redirecting the attack into a nearby pipe. The clang echoed through the fog-laden streets. "Your skill cannot save you forever, Van Helsing," the man sneered, before spinning to attack again. A calculated strike to the shoulder joint ended the assault, leaving him incapacitated but alive, an intentional warning left by the master. Steam hissed from vents below, revealing another trap, a series of spring-loaded mechanical spikes designed to impale anything crossing the alley. Van Helsing studied the device in his hand, noticing a subtle shift in the pulses, an regular flicker that hinted at the timing of the traps. He leaped over the first row, rolling mid-air to avoid the second, and slid under the last, disarming 2 traps by severing exposed gears. The alley's floor, riddled with mechanical devices and pressure plates, became a deadly chessboard, each movement calculated, each step anticipating the next hazard. "You cannot reach him," a voice called from above, emanating from a balcony rigged with rudimentary explosives. Van Helsing did not reply. Instead, he scaled a nearby wall, using corroded handholds and scaffolding, rolling over the edge to land in a crouch behind a stack of crates. Sparks hissed as a magical rune on the balcony flared, detonating harmlessly against stone where he had stood moments before. A low growl drew his attention to another monstrous guardian, a hybrid of flesh and machinery, limbs reinforced with brass plating, eyes glowing faintly with arcane energy. The creature charged, clawed feet pounding against cobblestone. Van Helsing's movement was a blur. He parried a clawed strike with a short sword, twisting to land a kick that destabilized the creature, sending it crashing into an iron gate. The gate bent with a groan, metal grinding against metal as the construct struggled to rise. Van Helsing delivered a precise downward strike to its exposed joints, severing gears and muscle alike. Another human agent emerged from a hidden alcove, a small device strapped to his chest, sparking with energy. "Van Helsing," he shouted, "you will fall before the master's design?" He launched a volley of spinning blades from the contraption. Van Helsing rolled under the first wave, striking out with a blade to dismantle the device mid-flight. The blade scattered across the street, one embedding itself in a nearby crate. The agent wud forward, but a precise kick sent him into the gutter, leaving him unconscious. The device in Van Helsing's hand pulsed faster, the crystalline core flashing in irregular sequences. Each blink revealed faint traces of the master's influence, the placement of traps, the presence of minor monsters, and residual energy from arcane devices embedded in the cityscape. Van Helsing studied the pattern, intuition guiding him alongside cold calculation. He recognized the rhythm of the device as a map, a set of clues embedded in the chaos. From a hidden doorway, a pair of minor monsters emerged, fused with mechanical augmentations. Their movements were unnaturally quick, joints squeaking and snapping with each step. Van Helsing met them with fluid precision. A sweep of his blade severing limbs and gears in perfect sequence, sparks and blood mingled on the slick cobblestones. The creatures lunged again, but were met with a rapid series of strikes, each one precise, each one lethal. "You will not survive this, Van Helsing," shouted a surviving human agent from a side stairwell. Hurling a coil of barbed wire infused with rudimentary arcane energy, it whipped through the alley, tearing at metal and stone. Van Helsing ducked and twisted mid-roll, a blade slicing the coil as it passed harmlessly over his shoulder. A kick sent the human tumbling down the steps, incapacitated but breathing. The device pulsed, the flickers becoming patterns, guiding him past mechanical pressure plates, spring-loaded blades and hidden contraptions that had claimed the lives of less experienced hunters. Each pulse, each subtle vibration indicated the path forward through a gauntlet meticulously designed to impede him. Van Helsing adjusted his pace, calculating each movement with centuries of learned skill. From above, a mechanical construct with multiple limbs dropped, gears grinding, claws snapping toward him. Van Helsing ducked, rolled, and drove a blade through one limb, sending the construct into a pile of crates. Sparks and steam hissed as the machine convulsed, finally collapsing in a heap. A minor monster nudged from the shadows, only to be met with a spinning kick that sent it crashing into an iron railing, gears grinding as it fell. The alley twisted again, leading to a larger open space where the air was thick with smoke and steam. Hidden within were human agents, each wielding daggers, crossbows, or small mechanical devices. "Van Helsing," one shouted, voice echoing against brick walls. "The master awaits, but you will not survive him." Van Helsing moved with uncanny speed, anticipating attacks, dismantling gadgets, disarming humans and severing hybrid limbs. A spinning gear trap lunged from the ground. He rolled beneath it, striking at the exposed gears to disable the mechanism. Another device released a cloud of corrosive gas. He moved through it with preternatural timing, strikes dispatched against two human attackers emerging from the smoke. The device pulsed once more, revealing a faint outline of the master's lair in the heart of the industrial district. The cryptic signals had become more coherent, each flicker pointing toward concealed entrances, hidden corridors, and patterns of influence left by the master. Van Helsing's hand brushed against the device, the crystalline core thrumming in rhythm with his heartbeat, guiding him with subtle precision through the maze of machinery and arcane hazards. From a scaffold above, a human agent hurled a small explosive, the fuse glowing faintly. Van Helsing twisted mid-air, avoiding the detonation, then drove a short sword into the man's chest, incapacitating him before he could leap again. The blast rocked nearby crates, sending gears and debris clattering across the stones. A monstrous guardian lunged from a hidden passage, claws extended, eyes glowing faintly with magic. Van Helsing sidestepped, slashing through metal and flesh in one motion, the creature collapsing to the cobblestones, sparks, blood, and oil mixed in a grisly display of destruction. Another human agent attempted to flank him, dagger poised, but a twist and kick sent him into the remains of a toppled contraption. Leaving him unconscious, the device pulsed faster, its flickers forming subtle arcs and patterns that revealed hidden energy sources and mechanical traps. Van Helsing studied it carefully, intuition and intellect guiding him. He recognized the signs. The first master's influence was woven into the city itself, each trap, each guardian, each corrupted device a deliberate challenge. "You are persistent, Van Helsing," a voice called from a balcony, muffled by steam and fog. "But the master will not be denied." A small mechanical construct leapt from the edge, claws snapping. Van Helsing rolled, slashing through the device mid-flight, dismantling it with swift, calculated strikes. The streets grew tighter, the density of traps and guardians increasing. Each step required observation, calculation, and instantaneous reaction. Van Helsing moved like a shadow through the chaos, dismantling constructs, incapacitating human agents, and neutralizing minor monsters with brutal efficiency. The device pulsed again, a rapid sequence of blinks signaling the final approach. Van Helsing pressed forward, alert to every sound, every flicker of movement, every trace of arcane energy. The master's lair lay just beyond, concealed within the industrial heart of London. From the shadows, a final hybrid guardian lunged, body fused with brass and steel, limbs ending in whirring claws. Van Helsing sidestepped, striking with fluid precision. Severing each limb in sequence, sparks flew, mixing with the rain-slicked cobblestones, the metallic scent mingling with blood and oil. The device pulsed once more, guiding him toward a hidden passage behind a wall of steam and scaffolding. Van Helsing pressed his hand to the crystalline core, deciphering the last of the cryptic signals. The master's lair was revealed, hidden, fortified, and deadly, but he had arrived. The industrial district held its breath. Every steam vent hissed, every gear groaned, every shadow shifted. Van Helsing stepped forward, the gauntlet of traps, guardians, and cryptic signals behind him, now poised to confront the first master at the center of the labyrinth. The industrial heart of London trembled beneath the weight of steam, smoke, and unseen menace. Van Helsing advanced through the narrow corridors of machinery and twisted iron, the small steampunk device pulsing rapidly in his hand, signaling proximity. Every flicker of the crystalline core indicated the master's presence, faint tremors of energy resonating through the city's veins. The first master waited, cloaked in shadow, a presence both human and otherworldly, drawing power from machinery and arcane devices scattered throughout the factory-turned lair. "You've come far, Van Helsing," the master's voice echoed, layered with distortion. "But this city will be your tomb." A hiss of steam released from vents above as mechanized constructs lurched forward, claws snapping, gears grinding. Minor monsters, twisted hybrids of flesh and brass, emerged from hidden passages, growling with unnatural strength. Van Helsing's reflexes, honed over centuries, guided every movement. He rolled beneath a sweeping limb, driving a blade through a fused joint, severing gears and sinew in one precise motion. Sparks and ichor flew, staining the slick cobblestones. "Do you finally understand, Van Helsing?" the Master called from the shadows, summoning arcane energy that twisted the air, distorting the steam and smoke. The organization does not forgive, the city itself obeys me. A blast of energy erupted from the floor, propelling a mechanical guard toward him. Van Helsing ducked, slashing upward with a blade that cut through both flesh and brass. The construct convulsed, gears flying apart as it collapsed into a heap. Another hybrid lunged from a side corridor, claws extended. A precise kick sent it crashing into a stack of crates. He followed with a series of strikes, each calculated to disable both limbs and mechanisms. The Master appeared briefly on a raised platform, robes flowing, mechanical augmentations glittering with energy. Van Helsing, every trap, every guardian, every machine you have overcome has been designed to break you. He extended a gauntleted hand, releasing a pulse that sent gears spinning violently, metal scraping metal in discordant rhythm. Van Helsing twisted midair, evading the blast, and drove a dagger into the Master's mechanical arm, severing a conduit that hissed sparks. From the shadows, a swarm of clockwork spiders skittered across the floor, red eyes glowing with malice. Van Helsing's blade flashed, sweeping through their legs, crushing gears and springs with surgical precision. One lunged at his ankle. He stomped down, severing its legs, sparks showering the wet stone. Another human agent, armed with a rudimentary arcane pistol, emerged from behind a collapsed wall. "You cannot escape, Van Helsing," he yelled. Firing, Van Helsing rolled to the side, slashing the gun from his hands, disarming the man before delivering a kick that sent him crashing into debris. The Master's laughter echoed, muffled by steam and metal. "Do you see now? Every movement, every step is within my design. You cannot prevail." A wave of kinetic energy blasted from the Master, spinning debris, cogs, and minor constructs through the air. Van Helsing's preternatural reflexes allowed him to dive beneath the arc, rolling into cover behind a pile of crates. He sprang to his feet, slicing through a mechanical limb that had swung toward him. The metallic clang ringing through the chamber. "You miscalculate, Master," Van Helsing called, voice calm amid chaos. "You underestimate centuries of experience." He lunged, blades flashing, striking at the Master's augmented limbs with precision, dismantling conduits and severing gears. Sparks erupted with each strike, and the acrid smell of burning metal filled the air. A twisted creature, partially human, partially machinery, lunged from a side platform. Van Helsing sidestepped, cutting its limbs in sequence. It shrieked, clutching at broken limbs, before toppling into a vented grate below. He did not pause. Another human agent advanced, whip tipped with glowing runes. Van Helsing deflected the strike, sending the whip snapping into the wall, then struck with a downward arc, incapacitating the man instantly. The Master moved with unnatural speed, augmented reflexes making each motion a blur. Van Helsing matched him blow for blow, parrying strikes, dodging blasts of energy, and countering with calculated precision. Gears ground, metal clashed, and the room shook as centuries of combat expertise met supernatural power. "You endure far longer than most, Van Helsing," the Master hissed. "But endurance alone cannot save you from what comes next." He struck the ground with an arcane device, sending a shockwave that threw debris in every direction. Van Helsing rolled beneath the impact, slicing through cables and mechanical limbs that threatened to pin him. Sparks, blood, and oil mixed across the floor, the room a chaotic tableau of destruction. From above, a mechanical construct swung from a rail, claws aimed at Van Helsing's head. He twisted, driving a dagger upward, severing a limb and sending the construct crashing. The Master's arcane sigils pulsed on the walls, each one releasing tendrils of energy that whipped through the air. Van Helsing slashed through a set of mechanical arms aimed at his chest, ducking beneath another strike, then drove a kick into the Master's midsection. "You fight well, Van Helsing," the Master said, breath ragged. "But the city bends to me." The floor beneath him shifted, panels rotating to reveal spinning gears tipped with blades, conveyor belts moving like snakes to crush or impale. Van Helsing adjusted, leaping, rolling, slicing through mechanisms to disable them, moving like a shadow amid the chaos. The device pulsed rapidly, guiding him to the weak points in the Master's defenses. Van Helsing moved with uncanny precision, striking conduits, dismantling mechanical limbs, and severing arcane sigils that fueled the Master's power. Each pulse of the device revealed another vulnerability. "You will not leave this city alive, Van Helsing." Master shouted, summoning the last of his energy into a massive spiraling construct of brass and steel. The machine groaned, gears spinning as it rose, claws extended, arcane energy sparking across its frame. Van Helsing rolled beneath it, slicing through hydraulic pistons, sending sparks and steam into the chamber. A kick destabilized the construct, and a final strike sent it crashing into a wall with a shattering clang. The Master stood, panting, limbs damaged, mechanical augmentation sparking. Van Helsing's blade struck again, Severing a conduit that hissed and expelled energy, the master staggered, attempting to summon another trap, but Van Helsing was relentless, closing the distance. A final calculated strike dismantled the master's mechanical enhancements, leaving him exposed. "Van Helsing," the master whispered, blood and oil dripping from a severed limb. "You will not survive what comes after." Van Helsing's blade drove through the master's chest, severing the final conduit, and the figure collapsed. Smoke rising from ruptured augmentations, sparks flew as the master's devices short-circuited, cascading failures rippling through the factory. Clockwork automatons ground to a halt, hybrid creatures collapsed, and hidden traps misfired harmlessly. The network of the first master unraveled, factories shaking, machines failing, and minor supernatural agents fleeing into the shadows. The city itself seemed to exhale, steam rising in chaotic plumes clashing with the dim glow of gas lamps. Van Helsing surveyed the destruction, the alleyways littered with broken machinery, minor monsters incapacitated, and human agents unconscious or fleeing. The first master's lair lay in ruins, a testament to centuries of calculation, combat, and supernatural endurance, yet the device in his hand pulsed faintly, signaling residual traces of influence. The organization's shadow lingered over London, its reach far from broken. Van Helsing understood that the victory, though significant, was only a step. The first master was dead, but the machinery of the organization continued to breathe, to threaten, to plan. "Your work is not finished, Van Helsing," a surviving agent spat from the shadows, voice trembling. "The masters, they control everything." Van Helsing's only response was a measured, silent step forward, hand brushing against the device. Its crystalline core pulsed once more, faint signals guiding him beyond the ruined lair, beyond the factories and broken streets. The transatlantic journey awaited, the hunt far from complete. New York lay ahead, filled with chaos, steam, and the remaining masters. Smoke and steam mingled as Van Helsing departed the industrial heart of London, every sense alert, every muscle coiled. The streets themselves whispered of danger, of traps yet undiscovered, of monsters yet to strike, but centuries of skill, preternatural reflexes, and unerring calculation allowed him to press forward, the pulse of the device marking the next step in his relentless pursuit. Even as he walked into the fog-choked streets once more, Van Helsing knew the city's shadowy heart had been shaken, its network destabilized. Factories groaned and cogs jammed, clockwork constructs lay in ruin, and minor supernatural agents had fled. The first master was dead. The hunt would continue. The organization's lingering presence, the unresolved threats, and the weight of centuries pressed on him. But Van Helsing's path was unwavering. The pulse of the device, faint and irregular, marked the route across London, toward the docks, toward the vessel that would carry him across the Atlantic. The hunt for the remaining masters would begin anew in New York. The fog swirled, carrying the scent of coal, oil, and faintly acrid smoke. Van Helsing's gaze was unflinching, hand steady on the device. Each footstep carried him closer to the next confrontation, each movement precise, each breath a measure of unrelenting resolve. The cabin was silent except for the faint ticking and whirring of the intricate steampunk device resting on the workbench. Its crystalline core pulsed with irregular intensity, each flicker casting fragmented light across the brass framework etched with near-invisible glyphs. Shadows stretched across the walls, folding over shelves cluttered with arcane implements, mechanical components, and scattered papers filled with cryptic calculations. A low metallic hum accompanied the device's subtle rotation, gears clicking with irregular cadence. Van Helsing's eyes scanned the etched symbols, tracing copper filaments and tiny circuits, seeking hidden patterns. Every scratch, every deviation suggested deliberate design, as though the device were testing the mind of the observer, challenging perception, patience, and intellect. "Curious, aren't you, Van Helsing?" a voice hissed from the far corner, distorted by the hum of machinery. "Or perhaps foolish. The device will guide, or it will betray." Fingers hovered over the crystalline surface, tracing interlocking spirals of mechanical and arcane markings. Each pulse suggested disturbances in distant locations, subtle anomalies that hinted at influence stretching far beyond London. Tiny clicks accompanied a minor rotation of the gears, aligning etched nodes in a sequence almost imperceptible to anyone less practiced. The device's light refracted through the crystalline core, scattering across the room in jagged lines. Van Helsing leaned closer, following the paths with eyes sharpened by centuries of observation. Arcane glyphs shimmered faintly, overlaying the brass framework, suggesting routes, hazards, and areas of concentrated influence. The pattern was fragmented, corrupted, deliberately so, but undeniable. Across the Atlantic, somewhere in New York, signals converged toward hidden nodes, locations where the second master's influence likely manifested. "You see it," the whisper continued, almost teasing. You think it leads, but every path contains deceit. Only comprehension preserves life, Van Helsing. Only patience ensures survival. The pulse of the device accelerated slightly, a subtle cue that alignment had been partially achieved. Tiny mechanical arms shifted, revealing secondary facets etched with faint runes. Light reflected through the lenses, casting spectral overlays that traced lines across the tabletop. Each intersection hinted at shipping routes, clusters of influence, and areas where minor supernatural agents could be deployed. Misleading nodes appeared deliberately, luring observers toward traps embedded in the organization's vast network. Van Helsing's fingers adjusted a dial, realigning a crystalline lens. The pulse steadied. A sequence of clicks revealed hidden channels of energy interwoven with the mechanical framework. Patterns emerged, convoluted, fragmented, but readable with precise interpretation. The device spoke in pulses, etchings, and minor vibrations transmitted through the floorboards, signaling weak points, safe passages, and potential hazards. Interpretation is survival, another voice hissed, closer now, resonating from the walls themselves. Misdirection is intention. Every pulse deceives and informs. Do you understand, Van Helsing, or will you falter? Van Helsing traced a particularly corrupted arc with a gloved fingertip, noting deviations from expected alignment. He murmured numbers, coordinates, and sequences under his breath, calculating distances and relative positions across oceans. Each flicker of the crystalline core corresponded to another node, a hidden cluster of influence that the second master had likely prepared. The room vibrated faintly as the device's pulse extended beyond its brass casing, resonating through the cabin. Shadows shivered on the walls, distorted and elongated. Each pulse seemed to suggest both direction and caution. Subtle indications of minor traps, corrupt conduits, and hidden agents. Every blink, every whir, was a layered message, demanding meticulous attention. Van Helsing, the original voice hissed again, sharper now. The organization answers to no church. Their morality is self-declared, their authority independent. Every choice must account for their reach, their vigilance, their intent. A soft metallic click followed, revealing a small etched compartment along the device's frame. Inside, miniature brass tablets contained sequences nearly imperceptible to casual observation. Van Helsing studied them, noting subtle variations in pattern and pulse. Each was a fragment of a larger puzzle, a test designed to separate the perceptive from the reckless. The crystalline core pulsed faster. Light fractured through the facets, projecting ghostly arcs across the cabin walls. Some arcs intersected, forming nodes that hummed faintly, suggesting potential harboring sites for minor supernatural constructs. Others appeared isolated, anomalies that could be traps or decoys. The device offered guidance, yet demanded intellect and discernment. It provided direction without certainty. Paths mislead, the whisper warned. Trust the pulse, not the form. Every reflection, every shadow, carries intent. Are you prepared, Van Helsing? Prepared to read between what is real and what is designed to deceive? Hands moved with precise deliberation, adjusting gears, rotating lenses, and tracing faint etchings. Each minor adjustment provoked a response. A shift in pulse, a new arc of light, a subtle vibration. Transmitted through the cabin's wooden floor. Each reaction confirmed partial comprehension, revealing nodes of influence while warning of potential hazards. The pattern was never complete, always layered, always corrupted. A living puzzle across oceans. A faint hiss emitted from the crystalline core, and Van Helsing's eyes caught an overlay of arcane glyphs pulsing in sequence. They indicated clusters of activity, faintly glowing where mechanical and magical energy intersected. Nodes likely marked industrial districts, hidden laboratories, and minor supernatural agents' territories. Subtle deviations hinted at decoys, areas designed to mislead even the most perceptive observer. You must anticipate every trap, Van Helsing, the whisper cautioned. Every misalignment, every delay, will cost you dearly. The Atlantic is only the threshold. Van Helsing noted each pulse, catalogued intersections, and marked weak points in the invisible lattice. His mind worked in layers, balancing recognition of hidden threats with potential avenues of approach. Each pulse conveyed information, every arc represented a decision, and every node held potential peril. He measured intervals, intensity, and rhythm, creating an intricate mental map of the device's corrupted messages. The device's small mechanical arms rotated in sequence, aligning secondary lenses with the crystalline facets. Each pulse became more precise, revealing hidden channels of energy connecting London to distant points across the Atlantic. Subtle vibrations transmitted through the floorboards suggested areas to avoid, weak points to exploit, and zones of heightened supernatural presence. Independent, the whisper emphasized. The organization answers to no church. Authority, morality, and consequence are all their own design. Understand, Van Helsing, that your choices are weighed not only by danger, but by intention beyond mortal measure. Van Helsing studied the final overlay. A fragmented map of energy lines, mechanical roots, and arcane nodes. Each flicker, each sequence pointed unmistakably toward New York. He catalogued anomalies, corrupted nodes, and potential hazards, committing sequences to memory. Every pulse contained layers of instruction and misdirection, requiring not instinct, but centuries of honed intellect to decipher. The crystalline core pulsed steadily, a heartbeat in the otherwise still cabin. Van Helsing's fingers adjusted the final dial, aligning a set of near-invisible glyphs with the pulses. A faint sequence emerged, safe channels, potential ambush points, and regions of concentrated influence clearly indicated, obscured by layers of corruption but ultimately readable. You have seen it, the whisper concluded, fading into silence. The path is faint, obscured, but real. Comprehend, and you survive. Fail, and you perish. The organization watches, and the Atlantic awaits. Van Helsing held the device carefully, observing each pulse, each glyph, each faintly glowing line. Across the Atlantic, hidden threats awaited. Every node represented potential supernatural or mechanical danger, every deviation a test of endurance, intellect, and perception. The device offered guidance, yet demanded full comprehension and vigilance. Shadows in the cabin deepened as Van Helsing catalogued every signal, every corrupted overlay, every subtle message embedded in the brass, crystal, and etchings. Each pulse reflected the moral weight of the task ahead, the independence of the organization, the absence of oversight, and the personal responsibility of judgment. Every step across the Atlantic would be a confrontation not only with creatures, devices, and traps, but with the ethical and strategic ambiguity of an organization beyond the church's reach. Finally, the device's core pulsed with a steady rhythm, the corrupted signals aligned to a discernible, if fragile, pattern. Van Helsing traced the sequence with care, memorizing anomalies and noting weak points, preparing his mind for the journey ahead. The path across the Atlantic was laid bare, not without danger, deception, or uncertainty, but a faint guiding pulse marked the course toward New York and the second master. Every pulse, every flicker, every whisper of mechanical energy reinforced the lesson. Intellect, vigilance, and patience were essential. Van Helsing catalogued each anomaly, each corrupted node, and each faintly glowing glyph, aware that the organization's reach was global, its intentions independent, and its traps meticulously designed. The cabin fell silent except for the steady ticking of the device. Shadows pooled in the corners, and the faint scent of oil and brass lingered. Van Helsing's gaze remained fixed on the crystalline core, absorbing the corrupted sequences, memorizing the faint overlays, and preparing for the transatlantic path. The pursuit of the next master had begun, and comprehension of the device would be the key to survival. In the dim confines of the cabin, brass and steel gleamed across the worktable. Every device lay in precise order. A collapsible crossbow with clockwork tensioning, throwing knives etched with protective runes, a mechanical gauntlet calibrated for concussive strikes, and vials of luminescent liquids that pulsed faintly with magical energy. Van Helsing scrutinized each item, turning lenses and adjusting springs, his centuries-honed judgment ensuring every tool met exacting standards. The devices were extensions of his strategy, each one designed to counter a specific threat he expected to face on the Atlantic crossing. A small automaton, shaped like a spider no larger than a fist, skittered across the tabletop as gears and cogs clicked softly. Its purpose was clear: detection of subtle fluctuations in magical energy and hidden mechanical traps. The crystalline core of the device, embedded in its thorax, flickered in rhythm with Van Helsing's steampunk instrument, each pulse revealing anomalies too faint for a human to perceive. The synchronization between man and machine was meticulous, centuries of experience guiding adjustments that balanced precision and reliability. Maps covered the remaining surface of the table, layered and annotated with meticulous care. Lines traced shipping routes across the Atlantic, noting prevailing currents, weather patterns, and concentrations of criminal or supernatural activity. Van Helsing studied the steampunk device, observing subtle pulses and irregularities that pointed to interference or obfuscation. Each flicker of the crystalline core indicated hidden dangers, regions where mechanical constructs might intercept, areas likely patrolled by human agents. or zones where supernatural entities had been reported. Even the currents betray secrets, murmured a voice from the corner of the cabin, the mechanical whisper of a servomotor harmonizing with the syllables. The automaton spun its legs in a rapid calibration, confirming subtle irregularities detected along the mapped routes. Van Helsing's eyes followed each trace on the maps, identifying points where the steampunk device indicated potential traps. Not a single detail was overlooked. Centuries of experience demanded thoroughness, and any miscalculation could be fatal. The weapons rack, positioned near the cabin's corner, reflected the dim glow of an overhead gas lamp. Steel blades of various lengths and balances glimmered as Van Helsing moved to examine them. Crosshatched hilts were checked for perfect balance. Edges were tested for sharpness against small whetstones. The mechanical gauntlet received attention as well, its moving components calibrated for precise, forceful strikes. Each weapon was assessed in silence, the ritualistic care reflecting a lifetime of preparation and the methodical mind of a man who had seen centuries of combat. Nearby, a collection of vials pulsed with faint luminescence. Each one contained a substance designed to disrupt constructs, repel supernatural entities, or provide protection against magical interference. One vial, cracked with fine lines, was discarded carefully. Even the smallest flaw could render it dangerous. Another was tested for volatility, shaken gently, and observed for consistent reaction. The attention to detail was painstaking yet necessary. The Atlantic journey offered no room for error. Threats both mundane and arcane awaited, and Van Helsing's survival depended on precise preparation. Mechanical observers perched on shelves, their articulated limbs poised to detect even the smallest disturbance. One adjusted its sensors, casting faint beams across maps and devices, highlighting areas of possible oversight. Subtle mechanical hums accompanied the motion, harmonizing with the pulsing light of the steampunk device. Each anomaly detected, slight misalignment, irregular reading, or faint pulse of magical interference, was cataloged mentally, integrated into a comprehensive strategy. Shipping schedules were laid alongside the maps, inked lines denoting departure and arrival times, expected conditions, and potential hazards. Van Helsing's gloved fingers traced the intersecting routes, cross-referencing against currents, wind patterns, and the hidden influence of supernatural forces. Each line was scrutinized for possible interception points, ambush zones, and concealment opportunities. Notes in invisible ink marked areas of heightened danger, and minor calculations corrected for tidal variation, ship velocity, and unexpected deviations. Arcane crystals, small yet potent, were arranged in alignment along the table's edge. Each emitted a subtle aura, calibrated to counteract interference and alert to latent magical currents. Van Helsing adjusted resonance, orientation, and frequency with methodical care. These crystals formed a protective network during transit, functioning as both detection and defensive mechanisms. Each pulse, each hum responded in tandem with the steampunk device, creating a layered security system that blended science, magic, and centuries of combat experience. A compact grappling hook, folded and calibrated, rested among other instruments. Its cables were reinforced with steel filaments, and the mechanical locking mechanism had been tested repeatedly. Alongside it, a clockwork hammer sat, capable of both melee and ranged concussive strikes. The mechanical monocle, lenses etched with detection glyphs, scanned the cabin for minor inconsistencies in magical energy or mechanical alignment. Every preparation emphasized Van Helsing's methodical approach, his centuries of knowledge distilled into precise actions. Van Helsing paused, consulting the steampunk device again. The crystalline core blinked with erratic pulses, signaling both minor corruption and hidden instructions. Patterns emerged only after prolonged scrutiny, subtle deviations in light and sound that indicated distant locations, potential routes, and areas of supernatural activity. Each signal required patience, intellect, and intuition to decipher, yet they revealed the broader strategy of the remaining masters. Careful layered traps designed to test both mind and body. Metallic clinks echoed as small devices were deployed across the cabin. Tiny constructs capable of detecting pressure, motion, or magical interference moved along designated paths. Each sensor, calibrated for precise measurement, fed information to Van Helsing's understanding of potential hazards. The patterns were cross-referenced against maps and schedules, revealing overlapping threats and points where human agents might converge with mechanical or supernatural obstacles. A vial containing a viscous, luminous fluid was uncorked. The liquid reacted to the ambient energy in the cabin, shifting in color and intensity. Van Helsing transferred measured portions into compact spheres for deployment, each designed to counter specific threats. The ritual of testing, calibrating, and securing each vial demanded concentration and dexterity. One misstep could render the fluid inert or dangerously volatile. Maps were rolled and unrolled repeatedly, routes traced, and alternative courses considered. Notes were added in coded glyphs, visible only under specific lenses. Each adjustment refined the plan for departure, ensuring that the vessel chosen would minimize exposure to known threats. Every detail, from prevailing winds to likely points of attack, was assessed through the combined lens of experience, intellect, and supernatural awareness. A mechanical bird perched atop a stack of books unfolded brass wings, each feather etched with calibration marks. It swooped along a calculated path, scanning for anomalies in the room. The automaton returned with recorded deviations, slight misalignments in map placement, minor irregularities in arcane energy readings, and traces of residual interference from prior passages. Each anomaly was logged mentally and cross-referenced against preparations for the voyage. The mechanical gauntlet received a final inspection. Springs were tensioned, moving joints tested, and strike surfaces calibrated. The crossbow bolts were arranged for rapid deployment, incendiary, corrosive, and kinetic options prepared for every conceivable encounter. Van Helsing observed each tool's response to small pressure and energy tests, confirming reliability under stress. The maps and schedules were consolidated. Layers of annotation were integrated, alternative paths for detours prepared, and contingency plans noted. Every potential deviation, storm, interception, or supernatural interference was accounted for. The Atlantic crossing would not tolerate oversight, and centuries of experience dictated absolute preparation. Finally, Van Helsing arranged the arcane crystals in a defensive grid around the cabin's core. Each crystal pulsed in response to latent energy, forming a protective lattice designed to alert to both magical and mechanical threats. The steampunk device on the table ticked in harmony with the crystals, the small crystalline core signaling readiness. Everything was aligned, every device calibrated, every route traced. The cabin fell silent except for the faint hum of mechanisms and the ticking of the steampunk device. Shadows shifted as small constructs returned to standby positions, and every tool awaited deployment. Van Helsing's presence dominated the space, his mind scanning maps, devices, and instruments, anticipating every threat that could emerge during the voyage. The preparations were complete, yet vigilance remained absolute. The Atlantic crossing would challenge even centuries of skill and endurance. The Atlantic stretched endlessly, gray waves rolling under a sky bruised with storm clouds. The ship pitched violently, ropes whining as the wind tore at the sails, and the scent of salt and oil mixed with faint traces of arcane residue. Van Helsing stood on deck, body braced, eyes scanning the horizon for the subtle disturbances that indicated threats beyond the natural. Each pulse of the steampunk device tethered to his wrist provided guidance, flickering faintly when danger approached. From the shadows of the rigging, a low hum erupted, mechanical and discordant. A construct, half clockwork, half organic, descended with the precision of a predator, wings extended, brass feathers glinting wetly in the stormlight. "You cannot outrun what hunts you, Van Helsing," a voice hissed from the coils of metal, distorted through some hidden speaker, mocking and cruel. Steel met claw with a flash of sparks. Van Helsing twisted, letting the construct's momentum carry it past, and a swipe of his blade severed a joint, scattering metal shards across the wet deck. Another mechanical bird dove from above, its wings screeching against the wind. He rolled, sweeping a concussive strike with a mechanical gauntlet that hurled it into the rigging, snapping cables with a metallic clang. A sudden shimmer of water erupted alongside the ship, a creature rising, scales slick with the Atlantic's chill. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting an unnatural intelligence. Van Helsing ducked as a jaw lined with teeth snapped shut mere inches from his head. A quick pivot, a slash across the flank, and the beast recoiled, hissing as the edge of his blade tore through fused musculature and steel-like plating. "Ships are fragile," the same disembodied voice sneered, carrying over the wind. "But your resolve is brittle, Van Helsing." Van Helsing's eyes flicked to the device. Its pulses aligned with the rhythms of the waves, revealing the creature's approach vector. Another wave slammed against the deck, throwing a human crewman off balance. Van Helsing grabbed the man, stabilizing him, while simultaneously blocking a swipe from another hybrid creature, a limbed amalgamation of flesh and gear. Sparks flew as the creature's metal prosthetic met the edge of a sharpened blade, grinding against it. The creature shrieked, retreating to strike again, but Van Helsing anticipated its arc, striking precisely at a vulnerable joint. From the crow's nest, a human agent loyal to the organization emerged, hurling a rope with a hooked end toward the deck. "Van Helsing, you will not survive this crossing." The rope bipped across, snapping dangerously close. Van Helsing's gauntlet caught the hook midair, twisting it free before delivering a backhand that sent the assailant sprawling against the mast. Lightning split the sky, illuminating more threats. Silhouettes of creatures swimming alongside, mechanical constructs dangling from hidden sails, arcane glyphs glowing faintly along the ship's rails. Van Helsing moved with preternatural precision. His strikes measured, each aimed at disabling both flesh and machine. His movements were fluid, a centuries-honed rhythm honed by countless hunts. Each assault met with instinct and calculation. A massive tentacle ruptured from the sea, wrapped in brass rings and glowing sigils. Crewmen screamed as it lashed toward the deck. Van Helsing leapt atop a crate, slicing downward with a mechanical sword, cutting through tendons, gears, and glyphs in a single, decisive stroke. Sparks and seawater mingled, hissing as they hit the steel plating. "You cannot outlast the ocean, Van Helsing," the disembodied voice intoned again, this time layered with metallic distortion. "Every wave carries your doom closer." The steampunk device pulsed violently, indicating another approach vector. Van Helsing spun, intercepting a small, spider-like construct racing along the deck. Each leg was tipped with tiny blades, each movement calculated to cripple. A kick destabilized it, a precise strike severed the joints, and the construct collapsed into shards of brass and whirring gears. Another leapt from the rigging, and Van Helsing rolled, his gauntlet smashing it into splinters mid-roll. From below deck a human agent charged, brandishing a crude mechanical crossbow. "Van Helsing, your centuries will not save you," he fired, bolts whistling across the storm. Van Helsing deflected each with his blade, pivoting to slam the attacker into the railing. The agent staggered, disarmed, and retreated into the shadows, leaving only a trail of sparks where the bolt had clipped the deck. The Atlantic seemed alive, waves crashing with a rhythm almost sentient. Another hybrid creature rose from the water, tentacles tipped with razor-like mechanisms. Van Helsing twisted, sweeping a concussive strike from his mechanical gauntlet, shattering the appendage, sparks flying with every contact. The creature shrieked, partially submerged, before sinking beneath the waves with a hiss that sounded like escaping steam. Fingers brushed along the device, aligning cogs and pulleys, reading the subtle pulses embedded in its crystalline core. Each flicker revealed hidden threats, submerged constructs, magical anomalies, and human agents waiting in ambush. Van Helsing calculated timings, angles, and sequences, every movement a preemptive strike against hazards both known and invisible. The ship pitched violently, another wave tossing a barrel into the deck. A mechanical serpent slithered from the shadows, its metal scales reflecting the flickering lantern light. Van Helsing struck swiftly, slicing through its segmented body before it could coil around an unsuspecting crewman. Sparks and fluid sprayed, the sound mingling with the wind and thunder above. "Do you even comprehend what awaits, Van Helsing?" hissed a voice from the rigging. "The sea is but the beginning." Van Helsing's eyes never left the horizon. Each pulse of the device, each subtle distortion in the air revealed new angles of attack. Another wave crashed, dislodging a crate that rolled toward a minor construct. A swift kick sent it flying, crushing it beneath the barrel. He ducked under a mechanical bird swooping from the mast, slashing a wing, sending it spiraling into the ocean. Hours passed in relentless vigilance. The device pulsed, the sea thrashed. Constructs and creatures attacked in endless waves. Van Helsing moved without hesitation, conserving energy only when absolutely necessary. Each strike, each evasion, each calculation was informed by centuries of endurance, knowledge, and strategic thinking. The storm intensified. Sheets of rain cut across the deck, and the wind became a physical force, tugging at sails and thrashing rigging. Van Helsing's cloak whipped violently around him as he leapt to intercept a hybrid with a serrated mechanical arm. He spun, redirected the force, and drove a blade into a vulnerable seam of its chest, sparks showering as the creature fell. Another creature, a massive construct resembling a cephalopod, lunged from the side. Van Helsing rolled under a crashing wave, his gauntlet smashing into its segmented limb, fracturing brass joints. "Do you feel your mortality yet, Van Helsing?" The distorted voice taunted, carried on the wind with sadistic glee. "Your centuries mean nothing out here." Van Helsing's device pulsed, signaling a nearby threat hidden beneath the waves. He read the subtle distortions in the water, predicting the creature's trajectory, and with a swift leap from a crate he plunged a blade through the hull of a mechanical shark, copper plates ripping with a scream of steam. Crewmen cheered, but their relief was fleeting as the Atlantic continued its relentless assault, both natural and unnatural. At dawn, the storm broke slightly, though gray clouds still churned over the horizon. broken constructs and wounded hybrids littered the deck. Human agents had retreated below, wounded or outmaneuvered. Van Helsing adjusted the device one final time, aligning the cogs and lenses to detect the next series of threats. The semi-cursed resilience that had carried him through London now served across a merciless ocean, each movement deliberate, precise, and unerring. The storm clouds broke faintly, revealing a narrow band of light on the horizon. Van Helsing observed the patterns of the waves, the distant shadow of approaching vessels, and the flicker of distant mechanical activity. Every pulse of the device signaled the path forward, every minor anomaly catalogued and stored in his mind. The Atlantic crossing would continue to challenge every ounce of strength, intellect, and perception, but Van Helsing's centuries of experience ensured he would survive to confront the dangers awaiting in New York. The city emerged from the morning fog like a beast of iron and smoke. New York's industrial heart pulsed with life and menace, every street a channel for clanging machinery, hissing steam, and the relentless march of human ambition. Van Helsing stood on the edge of the pier, boots scraping against slick wood, eyes sweeping the sprawling metropolis. Smokestacks twisted skyward, coughing acrid clouds. Into the gray air, rail lines crisscrossed overhead, belching sparks as clattering locomotives ferried cargo through the city's arteries. Below, the streets teemed with motion. Laborers shouted over the din of hammers and presses. Wagons rattled along uneven cobblestones. Groups of gang enforcers patrolled in tight formations, faces obscured by scarves and brass goggles, carrying crude mechanical devices strapped to belts or slung across shoulders. Van Helsing's gaze tracked each movement, mentally cataloging patterns, territories, and methods of control. A faint, unnatural shimmer flickered from a narrow alley to his left. Van Helsing's hand rested on the hilt of his mechanical sword, the weight grounding him. A small creature, no taller than a child but with twisted wiry limbs and glowing eyes, lurked in the shadows. It hissed and vanished when a cart rattled past. Van Helsing noted its path, recording the subtle vibrations transmitted through the cobblestones beneath him. He spoke quietly, the words sharp against the city's roar. Every shadow has purpose. Steam vents hissed along the streets, obscuring figures moving across rooftops. One figure, a human agent with clockwork enhancements, leapt from a fire escape, landing with a metallic clang. Van Helsing followed the trajectory, noting spring-assisted joints and servo-like movements. The agent froze, observing, then disappeared down a side street. The crystalline core of Van Helsing's wrist device pulsed faintly in response, signaling hidden mechanical constructs, arcane interference, and minor supernatural agents dispersed throughout the urban sprawl. A loud clang echoed from the marketplace. A gang enforcer swung a large steam-powered cudgel at a vendor's cart, sparks flying as metal struck crates. Van Helsing studied the tension in the man's shoulders, the timing of his strikes. Observing the habitual pauses likely used for communication with others, Van Helsing muttered under his breath, "Control through fear." The pattern was methodical, disciplined, a mark of someone trained or commanded by a hidden power. Above the city, dirigibles floated in the gray sky, tethered by thick cables, engines thrumming. Arcane glyphs glimmered faintly along their hulls. Van Helsing squinted, tracing the ley lines projected by the glyphs. Some vessels were observational, others likely armed, patrolling high-value districts. Each pulse of the device confirmed his suspicions, highlighting areas of concentrated influence, possible locations of hidden laboratories, and positions of human or supernatural operatives. From an intersection below, a street urchin darted across the cobblestones clutching a small brass cylinder. Van Helsing tracked silently, noting the device's pulse quicken. The cylinder emitted faint mechanical vibrations, indicating a tracking or signaling function. He assessed the child's movement, instrument of the organization or unwitting courier. Van Helsing calculated potential interception points and escape routes, noting that every step in the city could cascade into danger. A hiss from above drew attention. A clockwork serpent, armed with retractable blades, slithered along the rooftop ledge. Van Helsing moved quickly, blade flashing to slice through gears and coils before the creature could drop onto the street. Sparks and the faint smell of burnt oil filled the air. The presence of mechanical threats above and below demonstrated that the city itself had been engineered into a gauntlet of danger. In the industrial district, factories belched smoke and fire, casting long shadows over adjacent tenements. Van Helsing navigated with purpose, noting escape routes, choke points, and concentrations of supernatural residue. Signs of the organization's influence were subtle but unmistakable. Arcane symbols etched into beams, minor mechanical constructs hidden among scaffolding, and faint magical pulses resonating through the brickwork. Each observation offered insight into the second master's network, fragmented but coherent when overlaid with instinct. From a rooftop across the street, a human agent called down, voice metallic and distorted through a speaking tube. "Van Helsing, the city bends to us. Every alley, every vent, every shadow is ours." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. He did not answer, but the pulse of his device accelerated, confirming additional threats hidden from plain sight. Every gesture of the agent revealed the extent of control exerted across the cityscape, while also unintentionally exposing vulnerabilities. As evening fell, the city lights flickered to life, gas lamps and arcane torches casting long, wavering shadows. The metropolis became a lattice of danger, movement, and concealed power. Then, Helsing climbed to a vantage point, surveying the streets like a predator assessing prey. Each district, alley, and rooftop became a node in his mental map. Danger zones marked, potential clues regarding the second master cataloged, connections drawn, probabilities calculated. The chaotic symphony of New York, clanging machinery, hissing steam, shouting gangs, and arcane whispers, heightened his senses rather than deterring them. Centuries of experience guided every observation, every calculation, every step. The city was not a backdrop but a living labyrinth, a gauntlet designed to test wit, perception, and endurance. Somewhere within this iron and smoke metropolis, the second master waited, hidden yet discernible through patterns, traces, and subtle manipulations. From a nearby rooftop, a pair of mechanical crows circled, their metal wings glinting in the dim light. Van Helsing observed their flight paths, noting the areas they surveyed repeatedly. Arcane glyphs etched into the feathers pulsed faintly, feeding signals back to hidden observers. He moved silently, calculating which rooftops offered cover, which alleys could be traversed unseen, and which industrial corridors funneled both pedestrian and mechanical traffic into predictable patterns. A narrow bridge connecting two warehouse rooftops creaked under the weight of a human agent. Van Helsing adjusted his stance, ready for engagement, noting the spring-like motion of the agent's augmented legs. The figure stopped mid-step, raising a mechanical hand which shimmered faintly with magical glyphs. Van Helsing's device pulsed sharply, alerting him to the sudden interference. He remained still, watching, cataloging, measuring reaction times. The agent withdrew after a tense pause, signaling compliance with some unseen instruction. Steam vents along the streets hissed and spat scalding mist, obscuring the approach of a small group of enforcers carrying rudimentary mechanized shields. Van Helsing ducked behind a rooftop chimney, observing the formation and noting their methods of coordination. Their movements were precise, but pattern recognition revealed hesitation in their responses, a flaw that could be exploited. He marked their probable patrol route mentally, connecting it with ley line interference patterns picked up by his device. Every signal, every flicker of movement, every pulse of arcane energy was integrated into Van Helsing's strategic map. He noted the presence of minor supernatural entities, a shadowy figure glimpsed in an alley, a faint magical distortion near a furnace, the metallic hum of constructs moving unseen through factory corridors. Each observation added layers to the mental grid he had created. Nodes of danger and potential intelligence connected by invisible threads of probability and logic. By nightfall, Van Helsing had traversed multiple districts, climbing, ducking, observing, and calculating. Broken mechanical constructs lay scattered in corners, victims of his preemptive strikes during fleeting encounters. Arcane glyphs were disrupted, and minor threats neutralized before they could signal reinforcements. The city's industrial chaos had become an extension of his battlefield, every sound, smell, vibration, and pulse feeding into his mind like a living map. Van Helsing paused atop a smokestack, eyes scanning the horizon. The steampunk device on his wrist pulsed rhythmically, each flicker confirming the accuracy of his mental overlay. The second master's influence was extensive, but subtle cracks in the organization's control were already visible. Each alley, vent, rooftop, and conveyor belt carried potential intelligence. Every shadow contained both risk and opportunity. The city was alive, dangerous, and precise, yet, with careful calculation and centuries of vigilance, Van Helsing would uncover its secrets and confront the forces hiding in plain sight. Van Helsing moved through the streets of New York with calculated precision, his steps silent against the slick cobblestones. The industrial metropolis stretched outward, a maze of iron, brick, and smoke, where danger lurked behind every corner. Steam kissed from vents, masking the mechanical whir of traps and the soft, predatory scuttle of creatures hidden in shadow. His eyes scanned constantly, tracking subtle movements and flickers of unnatural light. The city had already revealed itself to be a labyrinth of threats. Now it would test his reflexes, combat skill, and ingenuity. A gang enforcer emerged from an alley, his brass goggles reflecting the glow of gas lamps. He carried a crude spring-loaded crossbow strapped across his chest, bolts glinting wickedly. Well, the hunter has wandered into our streets," the enforcer snarled, voice roughened by brass filters that distorted his words. "Perhaps you'll find New York less forgiving than London." Van Helsing's gloved fingers brushed the hilt of his mechanical sword. His device pulsed faintly, signaling the presence of hidden constructs nearby. Without a word he lunged, blade slicing through the air with measured force. Sparks erupted as the crossbow struck the edge of the sword, shattering a segment of the trigger mechanism. The enforcer leapt back, deploying a retractable shield that hissed as gears locked into place. A hiss echoed from the shadowed alley behind the enforcer. Van Helsing pivoted, eyes catching the glint of something wiry and unnatural. A small, wiry creature with luminescent eyes emerged from the shadows, claws snapping. Van Helsing's mechanical gauntlet met the attack, sending the creature sprawling across the cobblestones. "The city breeds cunning," he murmured, scanning for more movements. "Every shadow is a lesson." Steel and brass clashed again as the enforcer recovered, swinging a modified club tipped with arcane glyphs. Sparks danced against the cobblestones as Van Helsing parried, rolling to the side and kicking a barrel to create space. The gauntlet activated a concussive pulse, hurling the enforcer backward into a stack of crates. "Strength alone will not claim these streets," Van Helsing said, voice low, the words carried only by the wind. From the rooftops a mechanical crow swooped, wings etched with glowing runes. It dove toward him, talons extended. Van Helsing adjusted the wrist device, aligning its crystalline pulses with the crow's trajectory. With a swift motion he deflected the bird with the flat of his gauntlet, sending it careening into a smokestack. The glyphs fizzled and extinguished as the construct collapsed, motionless. Deeper into the industrial district, factories belched smoke and fire. Van Helsing navigated narrow walkways, noting escape routes and vantage points, every shadow a potential threat. A sudden hiss warned of a trap. A coil of spring-loaded blades launched from a concealed chute. He leapt, rolling across the walkway as the blades sliced through the air, clanging against metal supports. Landing softly, he traced the trigger mechanism, noting the rudimentary but effective steampunk ingenuity. "Innovation comes at a price," he said, snapping the mechanism with a quick strike. A gang of 3 enforcers appeared in a dimly lit courtyard, each wielding modified mechanical weapons. Clubs with spinning gears, bladed gauntlets, and a small portable arcane generator pulsing faintly. "The streets are ours," one shouted. "You'll bleed for every step, Hunter." Van Helsing moved with centuries of experience guiding him. He dispatched the first enforcer with a precise sweep of his mechanical sword, severing the spinning gears in one motion. The second lunged with a bladed gauntlet. Van Helsing sidestepped, applying pressure to a joint in the machinery, forcing it to lock with a grinding sound. The third fired the arcane generator, a pulse of energy crackling toward him. Van Helsing's gauntlet emitted a counterwave, dispersing the energy harmlessly into the air. A low guttural growl emerged from the shadows. From the corner of the courtyard, a humanoid figure with elongated limbs and phosphorescent eyes advanced, teeth glinting unnaturally. Van Helsing's device pulsed sharply, highlighting the creature's precise arc of attack. He parried, twisted, and struck, mechanical strikes meeting supernatural agility. Sparks flew as his gauntlet connected with bone and sinew, disabling one limb while the creature recoiled. "Flesh and steel alike yield to calculation," he observed, backing toward a stack of crates for cover. A sudden clang and hiss drew his attention upward. From the catwalk above, a small assemblage of mechanical traps, a cluster of spinning blades mounted on spring hinges, dropped toward him. Van Helsing rolled under the first, striking a second midair with a calculated kick, sending it spinning into the wall. One more blade descended, but his gauntlet's concussive strike shattered it against the floor with a shower of sparks. The human enforcers regrouped, attempting to flank him. Van Helsing darted between columns, using every shadow to his advantage, forcing them into predictable patterns. "Predictable, every one of you," he muttered. As they lunged again, he released a series of arcane spheres, small vials containing volatile substances designed to disrupt mechanical function. The spheres shattered on contact, disabling gears, arcs, and rudimentary constructs. A mechanical serpent slithered along the railings, blades clicking against each other as it advanced. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, tracking its motion and calculating timing. A swift strike with his sword severed the head, and the rest of its segmented body collapsed, thrashing helplessly before sliding from the railing. The enforcers hesitated, unsure whether to advance further, into the lethal calculus of Van Helsing's movements. Van Helsing pressed on, moving toward a factory complex at the district's edge. A low hum vibrated through the air. Mechanical contraptions began to stir, gears spinning in anticipation. From the shadows of stacked crates and scaffolding, several small humanoid automatons advanced, each armed with bladed appendages. He drew a sharp breath, spinning the mechanical gauntlet to intercept multiple attacks simultaneously. Sparks and oil sprayed with every contact, limbs collapsing under precise pressure. A voice rang out from a fire escape above, "Van Helsing, you'll never piece together the city's network." The agent's tone was metallic, threaded with arcane distortion. Van Helsing's eyes swept the rooftops, catching subtle pulse signals from hidden glyphs. He launched a concussive strike from the gauntlet, dislodging a loose girder that clattered across the alley below, forcing the agent to retreat. In a narrow alley, a trio of creatures lurked, their forms twisted, part animal, part mechanical, and part infernal. Their claws dripped with oil and faintly glowing ichor. Van Helsing sidestepped their initial assault, spinning his sword to cleave through the first. Then a calculated kick disabled the second. The third lunged, jaws snapping, but the gauntlet met it squarely, sending it crashing into a brick wall. He checked the pulse of his device. No additional immediate threats, but the city whispered of greater dangers ahead. By nightfall, Van Helsing had gained a foothold in New York. The streets were littered with disabled constructs, unconscious or retreating enforcers, and disrupted arcane traps. His device pulsed faintly, confirming multiple points of infiltration had been neutralized. Though distant signals indicated reinforcement and greater danger still lay ahead, from a rooftop above the distorted voice called once more. "You can survive tonight, Van Helsing, but the city will not be kind for long. Every corner harbors observation. Every shadow conceals a strike." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, scanning rooftops, alleys, and chimneys. Every signal from his wrist device was recorded and integrated into his mental map. The city was a living gauntlet. Mechanical, magical, and human threats intertwined in a complex lattice. His semi-cursed resilience and centuries of experience allowed him to endure and adapt. But he understood the challenge had only just begun. In the darkness of New York, amid smoke, steam, and faint glows of arcane energy, Van Helsing pressed onward. Each strike, each observation, each carefully measured movement reinforced his foothold. Every defeated enforcer and neutralized trap was a lesson. Every pulse of the device a guide. He would learn the city's rhythms, map its threats, and step by step uncover the network leading to the second master. Even as the first night drew to a close, Van Helsing remained vigilant. The streets whispered with distant movement, faint mechanical whirs and subtle magical interference. Every alley, every rooftop, every shadow was both a threat and a clue. And he, the hunter of monsters and master of strategy, was already calculating his next moves with deliberate preternatural focus. Van Helsing threaded his way through the twisting streets of New York's industrial districts, boots echoing softly against slick cobblestones. Steam hissed from vents, carrying the tang of oil and iron. The buildings rose like walls of a labyrinth, brick and steel stacked in oppressive tiers. Smokestacks twisting skyward as though clawing at the gray sky. Every shadow, every flicker of light demanded scrutiny. The second master's influence had already carved itself into the city's iron skeleton. He paused at the mouth of a narrow alley, hand resting on the hilt of his mechanical sword. A faint shimmer of energy danced across the bricks, a pulse so subtle that only a trained eye or a finely tuned device could detect it. Van Helsing crouched slightly, adjusting the crystalline core embedded in his gauntlet. The pulse intensified as he traced it, revealing the trajectory of an encoded message. A series of glyphs etched into metal pipes disguised as industrial ornamentation. "The city whispers secrets," he murmured, voice low, almost lost beneath the hiss of escaping steam. "And every whisper has a sender." The encoded runes led him along rooftops, over catwalks connecting factories, and through narrow passages where machinery groaned. Like living beasts, a faint metallic clink drew his attention. A small clockwork spider skittering along a beam, its legs etching sparks as they caught on the metal. Van Helsing extended a gauntleted hand, twisting a small dial on his device. The spider paused, its crystalline core pulsing in time with the wrist mechanism. A soft click, and the creature froze harmless and inert, allowing him to continue without raising alarm. Below, workers labored in the shadows, steam-powered presses hissing, gears spinning, and levers striking with rhythmic precision. Van Helsing observed patterns, noting human agents subtly guiding processes in ways that ensured not efficiency but concealment of the second master's influence. Arcane sigils glimmered faintly along girders, some etched invisibly into the iron with formulas that could disrupt ordinary perception. Every pulse of the city, mechanical or magical, fed into his mental map, revealing not just geography, but hierarchy, power, and intent. A voice called out from a fire escape above, distorted and metallic through a speaking tube, "Van Helsing, the streets are watched. You will find no step safe." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, tracking the pulse of his device. "Every step," he replied under his breath, though the words were not meant for the agent, "is calculated." A faint hiss alerted him to movement in the shadows of a warehouse doorway. A small creature, its body twisted with gears and sinew, lurked low, eyes glowing. Van Helsing moved swiftly, striking with his mechanical gauntlet. Sparks and viscous fluid mingled as the creature collapsed. His sword swept the area, catching a hidden trap. A spring-loaded arcane blade, tipped with runes that sparked when disturbed. With a calculated strike he disabled the mechanism, grinding its gears into silence. As he pressed forward, a pattern emerged in the scattered clues. Mechanical fragments, glyphs etched subtly, and discarded notes with cryptic codes. The second master had left a trail deliberate and layered. A gauntlet designed not only to test intruders but to assert dominion over the city. Van Helsing's fingers brushed the edge of a metallic pipe, tracing the glyphs with care. Each adjustment of his gauntlet's crystalline core allowed him to decode the hidden instructions, directions, warnings, and contingencies. From the rooftop across the alley, a human agent watched. Brass goggles reflected faintly in the lamplight. "The network is ours," the agent shouted, voice distorted through a small speaker. "You cannot comprehend its reach." Van Helsing did not respond, though his eyes traced the agent's movement, noting the weight of the weapons, the timing of their gestures, the subtle hum of embedded mechanical constructs. The agent's presence was a threat, but also an unintentional clue. A gap in patrols, a weak link in observation. He advanced along a narrow catwalk, silent and precise, calculating angles and timing, every step a preemptive strike against unseen dangers. A low rumble shook the ground as a large mechanical construct emerged from the shadows of a factory. It was humanoid but disproportionate, gears exposed along its arms, joints whirring, and faint glyphs etched into its torso pulsing with arcane light. The second master's handiwork, part automaton, part magical experiment, was designed for intimidation and lethality. Van Helsing circled, wrist device flickering, tracking energy flows and mechanical signals. "You tread carefully, but the city will swallow you," hissed a voice, mechanical distortion layered over flesh. The construct moved with startling speed, swinging a massive metal arm. Van Helsing dodged, countered with a precise strike from his gauntlet, sending the limb crashing into the cobblestones. Sparks flew. "Even your machinery bends to calculation," he muttered. But precision wins the day. The battle escalated as smaller clockwork constructs joined, darting from shadows, blades spinning, claws snapping. Van Helsing met each attack with fluid, centuries-honed rhythm. Strikes, parries, and concussive pulses from his gauntlet. Every move accounted for potential traps and the unpredictable behavior of the second master's mechanical army. The constructs fell in a cascade of shattered metal and sparks, each encounter sharpening his focus and reinforcing his mental map of the city's underworld. A distant hiss drew his attention toward a side passage. A minor supernatural creature, its skin translucent and etched with faintly glowing runes, emerged, stalking with unnatural grace. Van Helsing sidestepped, pivoting, and a well-aimed thrust of his mechanical sword disrupted the glyphic resonance along its limbs, forcing the creature into retreat. Every alley breeds a new adversary, the man observed under his breath, eyes scanning for additional threats. Van Helsing ducked beneath a conveyor of pipes bristling with arcane sensors, careful to avoid pressure plates that might trigger magical traps. He traced the lines of encoded glyphs along the wall, noting which conduits carried power and which acted as signaling arrays for human agents. Each discovery added to the mental map forming in his mind, a lattice of danger, influence, and opportunity. From above, a mechanical crow swooped down, wings whirring and beak snapping. Van Helsing sidestepped, striking with a calculated sweep that shattered the construct midair. Sparks rained down onto the street below. "Ingenious but predictable," he muttered. Footsteps echoed behind him, human and mechanical in tandem. Two agents emerged from the shadows, wielding steam-powered crossbows, their armor bristling with glyph-etched plates. "Van Helsing, you cannot escape the city's grasp," one shouted. Van Helsing pivoted, striking with gauntlet and blade in seamless coordination. Bolts clanged against reinforced armor as the mechanical edge of his gauntlet shattered weaponry and disrupted circuits. Each agent fell back, nursing minor wounds, calculating yet failing to anticipate the precision born of centuries of combat. A sudden vibration along the crystalline core of his device indicated an unseen mechanical observer tracking his progress through the factory network. Van Helsing moved to intercept, smashing the observer against a wall, gears grinding to silence. Each action revealed further clues. The second master's patrols favored paths and defensive redundancies. By the time the sun dipped low, casting the city in bruised gold and shadows, Van Helsing had traversed warehouses, factories, and rooftop catwalks. He had intercepted encoded messages, disabled traps, neutralized minor supernatural threats, and cataloged the movements of human agents. His mental map now spanned multiple districts, detailing the latticework of power, influence, and danger embedded into New York's industrial core. Van Helsing paused on a rooftop overlooking a smokestack-choked avenue. Smoke and steam mingled with the last light of day, casting long shadows that shifted like living creatures. He studied the pattern of signals pulsing from his device. Each beat confirmed what he already knew. The second master's reach was vast, blending human ingenuity with monstrous allies, mechanical contraptions, and arcane subterfuge. Patience, precision, observation, he muttered, voice low and deliberate. Everything converges where the second master expects. The city below was alive. A labyrinth of steel, fire, and hidden menace. Van Helsing's semi-cursed body tensed in anticipation of the next encounter, each muscle and joint ready for immediate action. He had established a foothold, but he knew the gauntlet had only begun. Every street, every alley, every hidden passage was a potential trap, each challenge designed to test reflexes, ingenuity, and endurance. In the distance, a faint chime resonated from a hidden clockwork device, the pulse of a signal deliberately designed to lure or warn. Van Helsing's fingers brushed the hilt of his sword. "The hunt continues," he whispered to the empty street, "and I will endure." The industrial maze of New York stretched before him, filled with arcane energy, mechanical precision, and the ever-watchful eyes of human and supernatural agents alike. Van Helsing's centuries of experience guided every observation, every calculation, every careful step. The second master's network was vast, complex, and dangerous. But the hunter was already weaving his counter-strategy, layer by layer, pulse by pulse, ready to strike when the moment demanded. Van Helsing descended into the bowels of New York's industrial underworld, steps echoing against damp stone and metal. The air grew thick with steam and the tang of heated oil, mingled with faint traces of ozone, signaling electrical currents running through arcane machinery. Pipes twisted overhead like a metal jungle, valves hitched under pressure, and the scent of iron mingled with an acrid, otherworldly tang. He paused at the entrance to a massive tunnel, fingers brushing the crystalline core embedded in his gauntlet. The device pulsed in response to magical interference, a faint glow signaling active wards and hidden traps. A voice, distorted through a metallic speaker embedded in the walls, called out, "You will not navigate these halls, Van Helsing. Every step is our domain." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. "I walk where I must," he replied under his breath, the words absorbed by the hiss of escaping steam. His hand adjusted the gauntlet, reading the faint hum of concealed gears and arcane circuits. Each pulse revealed the presence of traps, some mechanical, some magical, others a hybrid of the two. From the shadows, a steam-powered automaton emerged, its joints creaking as it advanced, a mounted piston hammer raised and ready. Van Helsing sidestepped a swinging arm, catching the edge of the hammer with his mechanical gauntlet, sparks flying with each contact. The automaton's eyes glowed with a pale blue light, programmed to track movement and anticipate attacks. Van Helsing pivoted, sweeping a concussive strike that shattered one of its limbs, gears and pistons clattering across the stone floor. A subtle hiss drew him toward a side corridor. There, a minor supernatural creature crouched low, sinewy and translucent, eyes glowing faintly with an inner fire. It leapt with unnatural grace, claws extended. Van Helsing rolled beneath the strike, pivoting to strike the creature's flank with a precise slash, disrupting the arcane glyphs etched along its limbs. It hissed and recoiled, vanishing into the shadows, leaving only the faint odor of burnt ozone and scorched flesh. The tunnels narrowed, forcing him into tighter spaces where traps were more intricate. A series of pressure plates lined the floor, each one connected to small arcane glyphs that, if triggered, could release lethal bursts of energy. Van Helsing studied the patterns, noting slight discolorations in the stone, faint scratches indicating previous mechanical triggers. A careful adjustment of his gauntlet's crystalline core allowed him to trace the circuits, effectively predicting which tiles could bear weight. He advanced cautiously, each step deliberate, balancing speed with precision. From a grated passage above, a mechanical sentry dropped silently, landing with a metallic clang, eyes glowing red. Its movement was fluid, almost humanoid, but every joint emitted a low hum, gears rotating under arcane force. Van Helsing sidestepped, slashing downward with his sword, severing a limb before the sentry could fully orient itself. Sparks and oil sprayed, catching the faint light from the glowing glyphs embedded in the walls. A voice echoed again, distorted and mocking. "You are persistent, Van Helsing, but persistence alone will not see you through." Van Helsing did not reply. He was too focused on the pulses transmitted through the device on his gauntlet. They revealed hidden mechanical arrays, concealed sensors, and magical wards. Each step became a calculated maneuver, a dance of reflexes, strategy, and observation. He paused at a junction where 3 tunnels converged. Small spider-like constructs skittered from the shadows, each one tipped with razor-sharp appendages and glowing cores. Van Helsing anticipated their arcs, sweeping a concussive strike that smashed 2 against the wall, and kicked the third into a nearby alcove where it collided with a discarded pipe, sparking as it collapsed. A low rumble announced the arrival of a larger automaton. Its body was covered in plates etched with arcane symbols, pistons pumping along its limbs, and a rotating steam cannon mounted on its shoulder. Van Helsing moved to the side, calculating trajectory and timing, his gauntlet whirring as it generated a magnetic pulse that disrupted the automaton's circuitry momentarily. Sparks erupted from the cannon, giving him a narrow window to close the distance. He struck the joint at the base of the arm, grinding gears and tendons into useless fragments. Another hiss, subtle and serpentine, alerted him to a supernatural threat. From a shadowed archway, a minor creature slithered forward, thin, translucent, with eyes that glimmered like molten glass. Van Helsing ducked beneath a sweeping strike and countered with a slash along its side, the edge of his sword disrupting the magical resonance. The creature recoiled, writhing before vanishing into a wall of steam, leaving only faint burn marks on the stone. The tunnels widened into an abandoned factory floor, the remnants of old machinery casting eerie shadows beneath dim flickering lanterns. Van Helsing surveyed the room carefully. Suspended from overhead rails were several small arcane devices, humming faintly, designed to detect motion and sound. A misstep could trigger a cascade of mechanical and magical countermeasures. Van Helsing adjusted his gauntlet, sending a low-frequency pulse through the floor that allowed him to trace hidden circuits and identify pressure-sensitive zones. From behind a stack of crates, a human agent emerged, clockwork enhancements gleaming under the lantern light. "You have no place here, Hunter," the agent said, voice metallic with a slight distortion, holding a spring-loaded crossbow that gleamed with arcane etchings. Van Helsing rolled forward, narrowly avoiding a bolt that sang past his shoulder. He slammed his gauntlet into the floor, generating a concussive shockwave that sent the agent tumbling backward, then spun, slicing through the crossbow before the weapon could recover. "Every threat," Van Helsing murmured, "teaches a lesson." Mechanical spiders and minor supernatural creatures now emerged from multiple points, forming a gauntlet of attack. Van Helsing pivoted, deflecting, striking, calculating. He used walls, machinery, and scaffolding to redirect attacks, exploiting weaknesses in the construct's programming and the arcane creature's vulnerabilities. Sparks and magical residue filled the air, mingling with steam and the smell of burning oil. A loud grinding of pistons signaled the approach of a larger automaton, one whose entire torso rotated with gears like a windmill. Van Helsing dodged the first strike, the momentum throwing a crate across the floor and breaking a small arcane sensor. He adjusted quickly, striking at exposed joints with precision, disabling it while keeping alert for other threats. "Why persist, Van Helsing?" a distorted voice hissed, emanating from the shadows. "Even your centuries of skill cannot overcome all that we have built." Van Helsing's eyes flicked to the crystalline core on his gauntlet. "Skill is the sum of centuries," he murmured, pivoting to meet the next wave. Every construct, every supernatural predator, every trap was a test of endurance, reflexes, and tactical mind. He dodged, blocked, countered, each motion fluid, anticipating paths and angles invisible to ordinary eyes. He moved deeper into the network, where tunnels narrowed again, steam hissing through valves above, sprinklers releasing scalding bursts to deter intruders. Pressure plates lined the floor, arcane glyphs pulsing faintly. Van Helsing's gauntlet emitted a soft, continuous hum, mapping the traps and revealing a safe path. Each step became a thread in a larger tapestry of movement, calculated to minimize exposure while maintaining forward momentum. From a side alcove, a minor supernatural creature lunged, claws extended, fangs glinting. Van Helsing ducked, sweeping his mechanical gauntlet to knock it aside, then drove the blade into the glyphs etched along its limbs. Sparks and faint bursts of light exploded as the creature recoiled. He paused momentarily, scanning for signals. The device pulsed with several hidden presences, human agents, arcane nodes, and mechanical patrols converging in the next junction. Van Helsing gritted his teeth, muscles tensing. Every strike, every deflection, every observation was critical. He adjusted levers on his gauntlet, aligning the crystalline core with the ambient energy, revealing hidden paths through the deadly network. The final corridor of the section stretched ahead, lined with pendulums embedded with sharp blades, overhead rails carrying spinning arcane discs, and spring-loaded automatons ready to attack at any misstep. Van Helsing stepped forward, pacing himself with careful precision. 1, 2, 3 measured steps, then a sprint between pendulums, blades whistling past mere inches from his boots. He rolled beneath a swinging disc, striking with gauntlet and sword in seamless combination. Sparks and ozone filled the corridor as he dismantled each obstacle in succession, blending brute force with careful calculation. By the time he emerged into the next chamber, gasping and coated in oil and minor burns, Van Helsing had traversed a network of mechanical and magical defenses that would have felled any ordinary man. The floor was littered with broken constructs, scattered gears, and the remnants of failed arcane traps. His semi-cursed body bore the toll of exertion, muscles aching, but his mind was sharper than ever. The patterns of the second master's domain now partially revealed, he paused at the threshold of the next chamber, surveying the intricate lattice of machinery, glyphs, and hidden surveillance. The pulse of the gauntlet's crystalline core throbbed with residual energy, revealing minor agents already repairing and resetting traps. Van Helsing's lips tightened. "Every victory breeds another test," he muttered. "And I will be ready." The underground laboratories and industrial tunnels of the second master's network were a crucible, designed to test endurance, combat skill, and intellect. Van Helsing had survived, adapting to the constantly shifting threats, neutralizing constructs, avoiding or countering arcane traps, and emerging with both insight and preparation. The next stage of the hunt awaited, and the second master would not yield easily. The labyrinth, beneath New York, twisted like a living entity, corridors branching and converging with maddening irregularity. Pipes hummed with pressurized steam, casting rhythmic shadows across stone and iron. Van Helsing's boots clanged softly against the metal walkways, each step measured, each movement precise. His gauntlet's crystalline core pulsed with faint, irregular rhythms, signaling active wards, mechanical constructs, and hidden human agents. A voice crackled through a concealed speaker embedded in the walls, distorted and taunting. "Every step forward, Van Helsing, brings you closer to exhaustion. You cannot endure what lies ahead." Van Helsing did not reply. His eyes tracked the subtle flickers of energy transmitted through the crystalline device. One pulse indicated a magical ward across a junction, designed to trigger a cascading trap of spinning blades and scalding steam. He crouched, brushing a finger along a pipe embedded with runes, reading the subtle distortions in the energy flow. With a deft twist of the gauntlet's control, he aligned its crystal to mimic the ward's signature, effectively neutralizing the trigger for a single safe passage. From a shadowed alcove a human agent emerged, mechanical limbs gleaming under dim light, crossbow raised. "This domain does not welcome hunters," the agent hissed, voice metallic and distorted. Van Helsing rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding a bolt etched with arcane runes. Sparks erupted where his gauntlet collided with the projectile. He pivoted, blade slicing through the crossbow, the mechanical components clattering to the floor. The agent lunged, and Van Helsing intercepted with the gauntlet, a concussive strike sending the attacker sprawling into a pile of crates. The man groaned, attempting to recover, but Van Helsing moved swiftly, severing the mechanical arm enhancements with precise strikes. The corridor narrowed, forcing Van Helsing to crouch beneath steam vents that hissed unpredictably. Pressure plates lined the floor, connected to arcane glyphs embedded in the walls. One misstep would trigger a volley of projectiles or bursts of fire. He paused, reading the faint glow of magical residuals and the subtle hum of mechanical wiring beneath the stone tiles. Slowly, deliberately, he moved, each step syncing with the rhythm of the gauntlet's pulses, avoiding the lethal triggers. A low clanking signaled the arrival of a steam-powered automaton. Its body rotated like a clockwork sculpture, gears grinding as it advanced, a heavy claw ready to crush. Van Helsing sidestepped a sweeping blow, slashing the wrist joint with his blade, sparks flying as metal met sharpened steel. The automaton recoiled, momentarily stalled, allowing him to strike the central gear mechanism. Pistons sputtered, releasing steam in a sharp hiss, and the construct collapsed. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the wall. One of the second master's supernatural creations. Small, translucent, with limbs elongated and unnaturally flexible, it leapt with inhuman speed, claws aiming for Van Helsing's throat. He twisted, the edge of his sword cutting through a glyph etched along its forearm. A burst of light accompanied the slash, disrupting the creature's arcane resonance. It hissed, retreating into the darkness, leaving only the scent of burnt ozone and charred flesh. The labyrinth widened into a chamber filled with arcane machinery, spinning gears and pipes coiling like serpents. Arcane glyphs glimmered faintly on the walls and floors. Van Helsing paused, scanning for hidden threats. From above, a pulley system released small mechanical spiders, their legs tipped with blades and arcane energy cores. Van Helsing ducked beneath their initial descent, pivoting to strike with precision. Sparks and magical residue exploded with each impact. One spider launched toward his shoulder. A swift twist of the gauntlet projected a magnetic pulse, sending it spinning into a wall. "Endurance alone will not save you," a voice hissed from the shadows. "Strategy is irrelevant when the domain itself conspires against you." Van Helsing adjusted his position, eyes tracking the ambient fluctuations in arcane energy. A series of pendulums embedded with razor-sharp edges swung along the chamber, synchronized with pressure-sensitive tiles. He timed his sprint, ducking beneath the blades, vaulting over tiles that glowed with latent magical energy. His gauntlet emitted a soft pulse, revealing hidden plates and safe footholds. Each motion was calculated, each breath measured, yet the strain was evident. Muscles tensed, joints ached, but the semi-cursed resilience that had carried him through centuries of hunts endured. A larger automaton emerged from a side passage, shoulders bristling with rotating blades powered by arcane cores. Its eyes glowed red, scanning for thermal and magical signatures. Van Helsing leapt to the side, slashing the wrist joint with his blade, sparks erupting with each contact. The automaton's rotation faltered, and a second strike severed its main gear assembly. Steam hissed, and the construct collapsed in a heap of broken brass and whirring mechanisms. From above, another human agent, enhanced with mechanical limbs and spring-assisted joints, dropped to the floor with a metallic clang. "You will not escape, Van Helsing," the agent shouted. Bolts and mechanical spikes were released in rapid succession. Van Helsing pivoted, deflecting projectiles with his gauntlet, then rolled forward, striking the agent's legs and disabling movement. Sparks flew, echoing against the metal walls. A sudden hiss indicated a supernatural predator advancing from the shadows. The creature was thin, almost skeletal, its body translucent, eyes glowing a dim red. Van Helsing twisted, the edge of his sword slicing across the glyphs etched along its torso, disrupting the magical energy. The creature recoiled, shrieking before disappearing into the steam. The labyrinthine tunnels narrowed again, walls slick with moisture and arcane residue. Pressure plates lined the floor, spinning blades dangled from the ceiling, and hidden springs readied themselves to launch projectiles. Van Helsing crouched low, calculating paths, timing movements to synchronize with the gauntlet's pulses. Every step was a test of reflexes, every motion a calculation of survival. From a grated shaft above, a mechanical serpent dropped. Fangs tipped with arcane energy aimed at Van Helsing's chest. He rolled beneath the attack, slashing upward to sever the spine of the construct. Sparks and magical residue filled the corridor, hissing as they contacted metal and stone. A low rumble reverberated through the walls. A larger automaton emerged, a hybrid of steel gears and arcane wards. Its movements were almost fluid, limbs bending in unnatural arcs. Van Helsing sidestepped, striking at joints and exposed mechanisms, sparks erupting as metal and blade collided. Each blow required precision, timing, and awareness of residual arcane energy. He ducked beneath a sweeping claw, pivoting to disable the automaton's central core. It collapsed, grinding to a halt in a cascade of sparks and hissing steam. From behind, a whisper echoed across the chamber. "Even your cursed resilience has limits, Van Helsing." Van Helsing's jaw tightened, muscles tensing. The semi-cursed body that had survived centuries of combat now ached under the strain of prolonged battle. Yet his mind remained sharp, parsing patterns, reading trajectories, and anticipating attacks. Every pulse of his gauntlet revealed hidden threats. Minor mechanical constructs, arcane nodes, and human agents ready to ambush. He moved through the final corridor of the section, where traps were densest. Pendulums, spring-loaded blades, arcane glyphs, and concealed projectiles. Van Helsing timed each step with precision, vaulting over swinging blades, sliding beneath rotating discs, and neutralizing glyphs with swift strikes from his gauntlet and sword. Sparks and magical residue mingled in the air, the scent of burnt ozone and metal filling his senses. By the time he emerged into a small antechamber, muscles burned, joints ached, and sweat mingled with grime along his face. Yet his eyes were sharp, reading the layout, noting hidden passages, and cataloging the minor wards he had neutralized. The semi-cursed resilience that had carried him this far had also exacted its toll, leaving him physically taxed but mentally alert, each strike and maneuver now part of a growing map of the second master's domain. Van Helsing paused, surveying the antechamber. Arcane glyphs lined the walls, a faint humming of mechanical constructs echoed in the distance, and the faint outlines of human agents could be discerned repairing traps already dismantled. Every corridor, every junction, every shadowed corner revealed the meticulous planning of the second master. The network was not simply defensive, it was a crucible, designed to wear down stamina, test reflexes, and challenge ingenuity. "Every step forward demands more," he muttered, adjusting the gauntlet to track residual energy. "And I will not falter." The pursuit through the labyrinth continued, each corridor a gauntlet, each encounter a trial. Van Helsing's combat skills, endurance, and tactical mind were tested relentlessly, yet he advanced, mapping patterns, neutralizing threats, and maintaining his forward momentum. The toll was undeniable, but the prize, a foothold in the second master's heart, was worth every strain. The tunnel stretched onward, shadows and machinery intertwining into a complex lattice. Van Helsing's gauntlet pulsed faintly, signaling more traps and agents ahead. He inhaled sharply, muscles tensed, eyes scanning for the next threat. Every strike, every evasion, every calculated step brought him closer to the core of the second master's operations. And with each advance, the cost became greater, testing the limits of his semi-cursed body and centuries-honed instincts. Van Helsing pushed open the final reinforced door, metal groaning under hidden mechanisms, and entered the heart of the second master's operations. The laboratory sprawled in chaotic precision, a fusion of steel girders, spinning gears, and conduits pulsating with arcane energy. Steam kitched from pipes snaking across the floor and ceiling, carrying both the acrid scent of heated metal and the faint ozone tang of magical wards. Every surface was alive with motion. Clockwork sentries scuttled across the ceiling, their limbs sharp and precise. Arcane glyphs glimmered along the walls, shifting faintly as if breathing. The mechanical construct, with serpentine limbs, tipped with blades and coils of electrical energy, advanced toward the center, its sensors scanning relentlessly. Van Helsing's crystalline gauntlet pulsed, warning him of the danger. He crouched behind a massive rotating gear assembly, eyes sweeping the room. "Every device, every construct, every glyph is a weapon," he muttered, voice low but firm. "And every weapon has a weakness." From above, a human agent with brass-plated limbs dropped with a metallic clang. "Welcome, Van Helsing. The Master anticipated your arrival," the agent sneered, voice distorted through a vocal modulator. With a flick of the wrist, a crossbow launched a bolt imbued with arcane energy. Van Helsing pivoted, deflecting it with the edge of his gauntlet. Sparks and blue energy arcing across the floor. He rolled forward, striking the agent's knee joint, sending him crashing into a pile of brass cogs and tubing. The laboratory itself seemed to respond to his movements. Steam vents erupted in sudden bursts, scalding air sweeping across the floor. Gears spun unexpectedly, creating swinging obstacles. Van Helsing timed each step meticulously, vaulting over a spinning disc that could have severed a limb, then sliding beneath a swinging cog lined with glowing runes. Each pulse of his gauntlet read the room's energy, revealing hidden triggers, latent wards, and mechanical hazards. A monstrous creation emerged from the shadows, a hybrid of muscle and machinery, its torso fused with brass plating, arms ending in spiked hammers, eyes glowing faintly with a malevolent intelligence. Van Helsing rolled, narrowly avoiding a hammer strike that shattered the floor beneath it. Sparks and debris flew as he slashed at exposed joints, severing wires and tearing at fused musculature. The creature recoiled with a screech of metal and bone, circling back for another attack. From a side platform, another human agent leapt, pistols modified with arcane sigils in hand. "You cannot dismantle the Master's design alone," he shouted, firing bolts of compressed energy. Van Helsing deflected the projectiles with the gauntlet, spinning to strike the agent's mechanical limbs. Sparks and hydraulic fluid sprayed as metal gave way to precise strikes. The agent fell back, panting but not yet defeated. The floor vibrated as a larger construct advanced, a spider-like automaton, its legs tipped with blades and arcane emitters. It skittered across the metal surface, moving faster than the human eye could follow. Van Helsing ducked beneath one leg, slashing at the hydraulic joints, then pivoted to deliver a concussive strike from the gauntlet, sending the construct collapsing into a heap of sparks and smoke. Arcane glyphs on the walls began to glow brighter, reacting to the disturbance. Van Helsing's gauntlet pulsed violently, alerting him to multiple hidden mechanisms. He ran a hand across a nearby control panel, toggling gears and valves with practiced precision, diverting steam vents and creating a temporary safe path across the room. A low hiss indicated the presence of another minor supernatural creature, this one small and serpentine with translucent skin and glowing eyes. It darted from a pile of machinery, aiming for Van Helsing's neck. He twisted, slashing the edge of his blade along a glyph on its spine. A burst of light disrupted its magical resonance, and it fell twitching, smoke rising from its scorched flesh. "You are persistent," a voice echoed, metallic and layered with arcane distortion. "But persistence alone will not save you from the core." Van Helsing advanced, moving between spinning cogs and rising pistons, every step a calculation of timing and trajectory. Steam hissed beneath his boots, nearly scalding him, but he pressed forward, each motion precise. A large mechanical arm swung from above, tipped with a serrated blade. He ducked and rolled, slicing exposed wiring to neutralize the device. Sparks erupted, illuminating the grotesque beauty of the laboratory. From a hidden alcove, a human agent hurled a vial of glowing liquid imbued with minor magical energy. Van Helsing caught it midair with his gauntlet, smashing it against the floor. The liquid hissed, releasing noxious fumes, and he adjusted his mask, eyes scanning for additional threats. A massive hybrid construct shifted its weight across the floor. Tentacle-like appendages fused with mechanical joints lashed out, each tipped with sharp claws and electrical conduits. Van Helsing spun, the gauntlet striking a critical joint. Sparks and magic burst in unison, the appendage twitching before retracting. Another strike severed a hydraulic line, forcing the creature to stumble backward, creating an opening. Above, a human agent shouted, voice carrying over the mechanical din, "He will not leave with knowledge of the master's design." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. The gauntlet pulsed, revealing the agent's trajectory and energy signatures. He rolled forward, slashing through mechanical limbs and disrupting arcane foci embedded in the agent's vestments. Sparks and shards of metal sprayed as the agent hit the floor, staggering but not fully incapacitated. The laboratory seemed to fight back with a will of its own. Gears spun faster, conduits emitted arcs of magical energy, and steam valves erupted with scalding force. Van Helsing ducked beneath a swinging cog, then vaulted onto a platform, slashing through chains holding a pendulum-like blade in place. Sparks scattered, illuminating the walls etched with arcane symbols. He adjusted a valve, diverting pressurized steam away from a corridor that would have trapped him, then slid along a narrow beam as a mechanical serpent lunged from the shadows. A minor supernatural creature leapt from the ceiling, limbs elongated and translucent, claws aimed for Van Helsing's head. He rolled beneath it, slashing at glyphs etched along its spine. Blue light erupted, and the creature fell twitching. Another skittering automaton approached, legs spinning rapidly. Van Helsing twisted, kicking it into a stack of gears, then smashed it with a concussive strike. "Persistence alone does not grant victory," the voice hissed again, echoing through the laboratory. "But observation, calculation, and adaptation. Perhaps you understand that now." Van Helsing's eyes scanned the laboratory, noting the interplay between mechanical and arcane defenses. Each device, construct, and glyph was part of a network, designed to react and adapt. He moved cautiously, using the gauntlet to read energy signatures, identify weak points, and anticipate attacks. Steam kissed from pipes above and below. Gears growled rhythmically. The faint hum of arcane power resonated along the walls. A massive automaton, its body a grotesque fusion of brass and muscle, lunged from the far corner. Its claws swung in a deadly arc. Van Helsing pivoted, slicing exposed wiring and disrupting the core mechanisms. Sparks flew, electricity arced, and the automaton staggered. He followed up with precise strikes to joints and arcane foci, neutralizing the threat while conserving energy. From behind a control console, a human agent attempted a surprise attack, hurling a clockwork bomb infused with arcane energy. Van Helsing deflected it with his gauntlet, the explosion sending smoke and sparks into the air. He rolled forward, striking the agent with a swift combination of gauntlet and sword, sending him sprawling into machinery. The core of the laboratory lay ahead, a massive control array embedded with arcane glyphs, levers, and consoles, humming with energy. Van Helsing paused, breath steadying, eyes scanning the entire room. The semi-cursed resilience of his body kept him alert despite the relentless assault. Every construct, every trap, every agent had been a test, each step a measure of his skill and endurance. He adjusted the gauntlet, aligning its crystal with the largest glyph array, reading the flow of energy and anticipating the master's next move. Sparks, steam, and arcane light bathed the room in a chaotic symphony. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, calculating, anticipating. Every angle, every weakness, every motion was noted. The laboratory itself had become a weapon, but so had he, adaptable, relentless, and prepared for the confrontation that awaited at the heart of this mechanical and arcane fortress. The air thrummed with tension. Van Helsing stepped forward, gauntlet glowing faintly, eyes scanning the labyrinth of machines, glyphs, and monstrous constructs. Every pulse of the room, every shift in energy, was a signal. The second master's defenses were vast, but Van Helsing's experience, ingenuity, and semi-cursed resilience had guided him this far. The next step would bring him face to face with the mastermind himself. Stepping into the central chamber, the heart of the second master's lair, the air was thick with heat, steam, and the faint metallic tang of ozone. Arcane glyphs etched into the walls pulsed faintly, casting flickering shadows across the machinery. The room was a cathedral of industry and sorcery. Rotating gears the size of doors, brass piping snaking along every surface, and monstrous constructs crouched in hidden alcoves awaiting command. The second master emerged from the shadows, cloaked in dark, oil-stained leather and brass plating, eyes glinting with intellect and malice. His gauntlet, fused with a lattice of wires and glowing sigils, crickled with latent energy. "Van Helsing," he said, voice calm yet deadly, "you followed every breadcrumb, outmaneuvered my agents, and endured my labyrinth. But the core is mine, and so are the consequences of your intrusion." Van Helsing's gauntlet pulsed, reading the master's energy signature and anticipating traps woven into every corner of the room. He scanned quickly, noting the alignment of gears, the positions of constructs, and the shimmer of hidden wards. "The consequences are yours," Van Helsing replied, his voice steady, carrying neither fear nor hesitation. "I'm here for the Countess, nothing else matters." With a flick of his wrist, the second master activated a series of mechanisms. Steel cables shot across the floor like snakes, attempting to ensnare Van Helsing. Steam vents erupted simultaneously, scalding air rolling toward him. He rolled, narrowly avoiding a heated blast, and slashed at a cable with a precise swing of his mechanical sword. Sparks danced across the metal floor as the cable snapped, rebounding harmlessly against a wall. From a platform above, a clockwork sentry dropped, hissing and spinning its bladed arms. Van Helsing pivoted, striking with his gauntlet to disable one limb, then slashing the exposed joints. Sparks flew, and the sentry tumbled into a mass of gears below. Another emerged immediately, testing his reflexes, but centuries of combat-honed instincts guided his every move. "You rely on speed and reflex alone," the second master said, stepping closer. "Yet this chamber is my design. It anticipates, adapts, and punishes." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, noting a subtle flicker in the master's gauntlet. An arcane pulse synchronizing with the machinery. He feinted left, drawing a reaction from the master, then rolled behind a heavy console. Sparks from a nearby gear shower masked his movement. With a swift adjustment of a nearby valve, he diverted a steam vent upward, scalding a mechanical limb attached to the master's constructs and forcing the first wave of attacks into retreat. "Clever," the master acknowledged, a grin tugging at his lips. "But cleverness alone will not suffice." The room exploded with motion. A massive automaton, its torso armored and fused with moving brass limbs tipped with spikes, lunged toward Van Helsing. At the same moment, two minor supernatural creatures, wiry and sinewy with glowing eyes, leapt from the shadows, claws aimed at his head. Van Helsing ducked beneath the automaton's strike, striking exposed hydraulic joints to disable one arm, then pivoted to crush a creature beneath his gauntlet. Sparks and greenish ichor mixed on the floor as he rolled to avoid the second, slicing through its torso with a fluid motion honed over centuries of battle. "You are tireless," the master said, raising his gauntlet. Sigils along his arm blazed brightly, energy arcs snapping between devices embedded in the room. "But endurance is finite, and you are only one man." Van Helsing adjusted the gauntlet on his wrist, its crystalline core pulsing violently, feeding him data on energy flows, mechanical vulnerabilities, and magical wards. He leapt atop a moving gear, slashing at a network of cables and conduits linking the master's constructs. Sparks flew as wires severed, arcs of energy lancing toward the ceiling harmlessly. He landed on a platform, sliding beneath a swinging pendulum imbued with a lethal arcane sigil, cutting it in half with a precise strike. A mechanical serpent erupted from a hidden tube, its jaws tipped with blades and electrical conduits. Van Helsing twisted, striking joints and exposed hydraulic lines, forcing it to recoil. Another automaton lunged from a side platform, and Van Helsing intercepted it with a concussive strike from his gauntlet, sending it crashing into a pile of crates. "You fight as if centuries of experience matter," the master said, his voice rising over the clamor. "But this chamber itself is my ally. Every motion, every reaction, every breath, you are playing into my design." Van Helsing's eyes flicked across the room, reading the interplay between mechanical and magical systems. He noted the timing of the pistons, the rotation of gears, the pulse of arcane glyphs, and the positions of remaining constructs. Calculating angles, velocities, and energy flows, he moved with precision, striking exposed joints, severing conduits, and neutralizing minor threats before they could converge. The second master lunged with his gauntlet raised, a surge of energy erupting along the floor toward Van Helsing. He rolled beneath it, slashing at a pressure conduit, redirecting the force harmlessly into a pile of machinery. Sparks and steam filled the air. Van Helsing sprang forward, blade slicing through one of the master's mechanical assistants, then pivoted to strike a critical glyph along the gauntlet, disrupting the energy flow. The master stumbled, eyes narrowing with annoyance. "You adapt quickly," he hissed, breath sharp. "But adaptability has limits." Van Helsing's semi-cursed body absorbed the strain. Muscles screamed, joints ached, but his mind remained sharp, calculating, predicting. A series of minor automata emerged from hidden compartments and supernatural creatures descended from the rafters. Van Helsing moved like a conductor of chaos, each strike precise, each movement measured. Constructs fell under a combination of blade and gauntlet, creatures disabled or destroyed with surgical precision. The master unleashed a surge of energy, crackling and snapping through the air. Van Helsing's gauntlet pulsed, warning him of traps embedded in the floor and walls. He dove beneath an arcane blast, striking a support beam rigged with glyphs. Sparks erupted as metal bent, severing connections and creating a small opening. Rolling forward, he struck the master's side, metal against flesh, forcing him back. "You will not leave here with victory," the master shouted, staggering but relentless. "The city bends to my will. Every shadow, every machine, every whisper of magic is mine." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. "You may control the city," he said, blade raised, "but not me. Not now." With a calculated feint, Van Helsing drew the master toward a central control console. Gears, pistons, and glyphs crisscrossed its surface, but Van Helsing had mapped the energy flows. He struck a critical joint in the master's gauntlet, arcs of energy scattering harmlessly, then pivoted to deliver a precise blow to the second master's midsection. The man stumbled, momentarily stunned. A monstrous automaton lunged from the rear, but Van Helsing anticipated its trajectory. He rolled beneath its swing, striking exposed hydraulics, sending the construct tumbling into a wall. The master attempted to recover, unleashing another energy surge, but Van Helsing intercepted with the gauntlet, redirecting the force into a network of conduits. Sparks, steam, and arcs of magical energy erupted, filling the chamber with blinding light and deafening sound. Van Helsing seized the moment. He struck the master's gauntlet directly, disrupting its core energy field. Sparks flew, wires severed, and a scream of frustration echoed across the chamber. He followed with a swift combination of strikes, blade and gauntlet working in tandem. The master fell to his knees exhausted, energy dissipating from his constructs. "You cannot," the master gasped, struggling to rise. "You will pay." Van Helsing pressed the advantage, severing a final conduit, dismantling the gauntlet completely. The second master's remaining constructs collapsed in a cascade of sparks and smoke. With a precise strike, Van Helsing ended the confrontation, driving the edge of his blade through the heart of the mastermind. The chamber fell silent, save for the hiss of cooling steam and the drip of water from burst pipes. Van Helsing sank to one knee, chest heaving, body battered, joints aching. Every muscle burned, every tendon protested. His gauntlet flickered faintly, reading residual energy but no longer detecting immediate threats. The laboratory, once a lethal maze of steampunk ingenuity and arcane power, was now still. Victory had been won, but at a cost. He allowed himself a brief moment to assess the aftermath. Broken constructs, shattered glyphs, and twisted machinery littered the floor. The second master's network of mechanical and magical defenses lay in ruin, but Van Helsing knew that this was only one step. The final master awaited, and the challenge would be even greater. Rising slowly, Van Helsing's eyes turned toward the shadows, toward the flicker of arcane light still faintly pulsing in hidden corners. His body was strained, his mind exhausted, yet his focus remained unbroken. The Countess's safety depended on the continuation of this fight. The second master was dead, but the war was far from over. Van Helsing's gauntlet pulsed one final time, faintly, as if acknowledging the victory and warning of challenges yet to come. He exhaled, muscles tight, mind calculating, as he prepared to move onward. The battle had been brutal, relentless, and total, but the path forward was clear. The industrial districts of New York stretched like a dark metallic maze beneath the waning light. Smoke from countless factories coiled into the sky, mingling with the gray haze of early evening, while the hiss of steam vents punctuated the ceaseless hum of machinery. The smell of oil, soot, and hot metal hung thickly in the air, settling in the lungs like ash. Van Helsing moved through the alleys and elevated catwalks with careful precision, eyes scanning for the subtlest anomalies. Encoded markings etched into steel beams, faint residual energy from arcane traps, and mechanical decoys meant to mislead even the most seasoned observer. Encoded warnings appeared first, subtle glyphs etched onto crates, lampposts, and factory walls. Each symbol conveyed not just a message but a taunt, a calculated breadcrumb trail to test and frustrate any pursuer. Van Helsing's fingers brushed against the crystalline core of his forearm device, noting its pulsing vibrations in response to the hidden magic. The signals were faint, layered within the urban din, but his centuries-honed instincts deciphered them with patient scrutiny. "Every mark designed to deceive," he muttered, voice swallowed by the industrial chorus. "Every shadow a potential ambush." A low metallic chuckle echoed from an overhead conduit, almost human, distorted and mocking. Van Helsing's head snapped toward the sound. "Clever," the voice hissed, "but not clever enough." From above, steam-powered cranes rotated methodically, gears clanking against one another. On a distant rooftop, a mechanical bird perched, its brass feathers glinting in the dim light. The device pulsed subtly, indicating the creature's presence and its surveillance role. Van Helsing watched it pivot and scan, anticipating that any abrupt movement or misstep would trigger a hidden trap. Across a narrow street, gang members shuffled crates with suspicious care, their movements slightly off-rhythm, as if rehearsed to signal unseen allies. The master's influence reached into every corner, every interaction engineered to obscure the true trail. "Move carefully," a distorted voice called from the shadows, laughter echoing off brick walls. A rat-like creature with mechanical limbs darted between crates, squealing and hissing. Van Helsing's gauntlet whipped forward, crushing its wiry frame. Sparks and arcane residue sizzled in the air, mingling with the smell of burning metal. A sudden hiss echoed from a nearby alley. A minor supernatural creature, no larger than a man's forearm but with elongated limbs and a serpentine face, slithered from the shadows. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the flickering lights of gas lamps and factory lanterns. Van Helsing's hand went to his mechanical gauntlet, and in a fluid motion, he struck, shattering the creature's limbs with a concussive blow. Sparks and arcane residue danced in the air, the aftermath of both physical and mystical force. Every step, the disembodied voice of a surveillance automaton seemed to whisper from the shadows, "is anticipated." Van Helsing pivoted, slicing through another small clockwork sentinel that leapt from a crate with spring-loaded legs. "Anticipated, yes, but not enough," he muttered under his breath. A shard of steel from the construct clattered against a pipe above, making him flinch, eyes narrowing as he scanned for additional threats. He paused near a lattice of overhead pipes, scanning the maze of scaffolding and conveyor belts above. Hidden within the tangle were arcane sigils, faintly glowing and designed to trigger mechanical or magical responses if disturbed. Van Helsing's eyes followed the patterns, tracing invisible lines of potential danger. He adjusted the cogs and lenses of his forearm device, synchronizing it with the residual energy in the glyphs. The faint hum of the mechanisms aligned with his pulse, creating a rhythm that revealed traps invisible to the untrained eye. A mechanical decoy, shaped like a human agent, lurched from the shadow of a warehouse doorway, pistons hissing as its limbs extended. Van Helsing pivoted, slicing a path through the gears of the construct with his mechanical sword. Sparks flew, clanging against metal beams. "Not bad," a hidden speaker crackled. "But your timing falters." Van Helsing gritted his teeth, eyes narrowing as he located and disabled the tripwire triggering the decoy. The device's pulse indicated further hidden threats. Wires underfoot, concealed compartments along the walls, and latent arcane charges. Each movement had to be precise. One misstep could release a torrent of fire, steam, or energy from the complex industrial environment. Above, a dirigible glided silently across the smoky sky, arcane glyphs along its hull, faintly pulsating. Van Helsing estimated its range, probable armaments, and likely points of descent. "The master is everywhere," he muttered under his breath. Watching for the next clue, the encoded signals converged subtly, guiding him along a path designed to test perception, endurance, and intellect simultaneously. A shadow moved across a distant rooftop, a human agent with spring-loaded prosthetic legs. Van Helsing anticipated its trajectory, ducking behind a stack of crates as a crossbow bolt embedded itself in the wood beside him with a resounding thump. "Persistent," he murmured, adjusting the pulse settings on his device to detect magical signatures in real time. Through narrow alleys, over rickety catwalks, and past the clanging of unseen machinery, Van Helsing tracked each anomaly with relentless focus. Encoded patterns intertwined with mechanical decoys and manipulated criminal networks, forming a web of subtle influence. A worker moved too deliberately, pausing mid-step near a stack of barrels. Another crane shifted with improbable timing. Every irregularity was noted, every signal integrated into a growing mental map of the master's domain. Predictable, yet clever. A metallic voice from a hidden speaker intoned mockingly. Van Helsing did not respond, but his hand adjusted the mechanical monocle strapped across his eye. Lenses etched with detection glyphs illuminated concealed lines of motion, revealing wires strung between lampposts and scaffolding. The telltale shimmer of arcane residue marking trap sequences. With a single measured step he avoided a tripwire, then shifted a pipe slightly to reveal a hidden compartment filled with minor constructs ready to strike. A voice hissed from the shadows, "You cannot pass without consequence." Van Helsing grinned faintly and threw a small arcane charge that disabled the trap silently. Sparks arced across the metal walls, a faint hiss of steam masking the residual energy as it discharged harmlessly. Another hiss, another shadow. A minor elemental, wreathed in faint steam and metallic dust, lugged toward him from a catwalk. Van Helsing ducked, rolling through the impact, and slashed upward, severing the creature's limb before it could strike again. The air shimmered with heat and residual energy, acrid smells mingling with the oil-scented fog. "Enough games," he growled. "Show yourself, master, if you dare." The city's industrial heart was a labyrinth, and Van Helsing navigated it as both hunter and analyst. Every creaking beam, every hiss of steam, every flicker of arcane light carried potential information. Mechanical decoys advanced cautiously from shadows. Gang enforcers, human or enhanced, moved in patterns, signaling the reach of the third master. Each encounter, each observation was a test of endurance, reflex, and intellect. By nightfall, Van Helsing had mapped several key districts, identifying patterns in the third master's manipulations and the probable locations of deadly traps. Encoded warnings had revealed pathways, mechanical decoys had been neutralized, and minor supernatural threats had been anticipated and removed. Though the pursuit had been exhausting, his semi-cursed resilience allowed him to continue, muscles aching but mind sharp, instincts honed through centuries of similar hunts. The final clue of the day lay in a shadowed intersection beneath a massive factory chimney. Arcane symbols carved into the brick glimmered faintly under the dim light, mechanical tracers humming with energy. Van Helsing knelt, observing the residue and noting the likely placement of a hidden sentinel above. He adjusted his device, aligning it with the energy signature, and smiled faintly at the confirmation. A path forward, subtle yet unmistakable, leading deeper into the third master's dominion. "Forward then," he muttered softly, steeling himself. "Every test passed, every threat noted, but the gauntlet is only beginning." Every observation, every careful step, every pulse of his device had reinforced a single truth. The third master's cunning was vast, his reach pervasive, and the gauntlet ahead would test every ounce of Van Helsing's longevity, reflexes, and intellect. Yet with each encoded warning deciphered, each trap evaded, and each minor adversary overcome, Van Helsing edged closer to the final confrontation, ready to meet the challenges of the industrial labyrinth head-on. Van Helsing descended into the bowels of New York's industrial underworld, the air growing thick with soot, steam, and the acrid tang of overheated machinery. Pipes snaked along the ceilings and walls like metal serpents, hissing sporadically, releasing jets of scalding vapor. The dim glow of arcane lights barely penetrated the gloom, revealing glimpses of rusted gears and machinery that seemed almost alive. Every step forward was measured. The echo of his boots across metal grates could carry farther than expected, triggering distant sensors or alerting hidden agents. The first confrontation came swiftly. From a shadowed corridor, a mechanical sentry, nearly the height of a man and bristling with pistons and spiked limbs, lurched forward. Its optics glowed a harsh red, scanning for motion. Van Helsing pivoted, rolling beneath its swinging arm, his mechanical gauntlet slamming into one of its pistons. Sparks flew, clanging off the walls. "Clever construction," a distorted voice echoed from the darkness, "but predictable." Van Helsing's eyes scanned the surrounding corridors, identifying the array of arcane glyphs etched into the floor and walls, each designed to trigger hidden traps or augment the sentry's movements. As he moved through the winding passages, the faint sound of whirring gears signaled the arrival of a second threat. A steam-powered construct resembling a humanoid figure with extended clawed arms and rotating saw blades for forearms emerged from behind a stack of crates. Van Helsing ducked, bringing his mechanical sword down with precision, severing one clawed appendage before the device could strike again. The air filled with a mixture of steam, oil, and ozone as the automaton collapsed in a heap of smoking gears. "Not bad," a mechanical voice intoned from the shadows, muffled but mocking. Van Helsing crouched, peering around a rusted support beam. Two smaller constructs, shaped like quadrupedal beasts, advanced with synchronized precision, their joints hissing as they propelled themselves forward. He adjusted the lenses on his mechanical monocle, revealing faint lines of magical energy emanating from the floor beneath them. Timing his movements to the rhythm of the energy pulses, he launched a small arcane charge that disrupted their coordination, sending them tumbling into one another. From above, a series of ceiling-mounted devices whirred to life. Arcane turbines spun, generating a low-frequency hum that resonated through the metal floors. Any disturbance could trigger a cascading release of energy. Van Helsing moved carefully, his centuries-honed reflexes guiding every step. He counted the beats of the turbines, matching his stride to avoid the zones of maximum arcane discharge. A sudden roar reverberated through the tunnels. From a shadowed alcove emerged a monstrous ally, a creature of sinew and machinery, its body fused with brass and steel, eyes glowing with unnatural light. Its limbs ended in rotating drills and spiked appendages, and steam hissed from vents along its torso. Van Helsing assessed the creature, noting the faint arcane runes embedded along its limbs. Each rune pulsed in sequence, enhancing its strength and speed. He pivoted, striking at one rune with a precise arcane-infused blow. Sparks and faint blue energy erupted, temporarily disrupting its motion. But the creature recovered instantly. Lunging forward with renewed ferocity, Van Helsing rolled, narrowly avoiding the drill limbs, and sprang to a higher catwalk. From his elevated vantage he surveyed the corridor, noting multiple concealed tripwires and glyphs designed to summon additional automatons if tripped. He activated a small device on his gauntlet, sending a pulse that revealed the hidden tripwires and the faint traces of magical interference. With careful precision he severed the wires, neutralizing potential reinforcements before they could act. Persistent, a voice hissed from the darkness, mechanical yet human-like. But not beyond our grasp. Van Helsing ignored it, concentrating instead on the sequence of glowing sigils ahead. Each sigil represented a deadly trap. One would ignite a burst of superheated steam, another would release a volley of arcane-charged bolts. He timed his movements, leaping and rolling to bypass each hazard while countering mechanical threats. A quadrupedal construct lunged from the shadows, its legs powered by steam pistons, claws snapping. Van Helsing sidestepped, striking a support beam that sent a cascade of falling metal piping onto the creature. It yelped a metallic screech and scrambled backward, giving him space to move deeper into the tunnel network. The faint hiss of magical energy and the smell of burning brass filled the air. In a small chamber, he discovered a network of arcane devices, a lattice of pulsing glyphs etched into the walls, powered by a central crystalline core that radiated energy. Van Helsing crouched, analyzing the flow. He rotated lenses on his monocle to trace the energy lines, noting points where disruption would allow safe passage without triggering a full discharge. With a precise throw of an arcane-infused tool, he severed a key conduit, dimming the glow and rendering the devices inert. From a side corridor, human agents emerged, their eyes enhanced with mechanical lenses and their arms bristling with experimental firearms. "Stop," one shouted, the voice echoing unnaturally in the tunnel. Van Helsing struck first, a calculated sweep of his mechanical sword disarming one agent. Sparks flew as his blade severed the trigger mechanisms of the weapon. The second agent lunged with a retractable blade mounted to his forearm, but Van Helsing anticipated the motion, sidestepping and delivering a concussive punch with his gauntlet that sent the attacker sprawling against the wall. The deeper he advanced, the more intricate the defenses became. Steam vents hissed unpredictably, gears rotated in impossible sequences, and minor supernatural creatures, spectral forms tethered to mechanical devices, emerged from shadowed alcoves. Each required Van Helsing to combine combat skill with tactical ingenuity. Exploiting the environment as much as his own reflexes and arcane knowledge, he ducked under a rotating blade, sent a mechanical construct barreling into a wall of glowing runes, and moved with fluid grace, each action calculated to preserve his energy while maximizing the efficiency of his strikes. At one junction, a massive lattice of interlocking gears threatened to crush any who passed. Van Helsing traced a faint energy signature along the teeth of the gears, discovering a hidden override valve. He twisted it, the mechanisms groaning, and created a narrow gap just wide enough to slip through. Sparks and steam erupted behind him as the gears resumed motion, a close call that left his muscles straining but his mind focused. "Impressive," a mechanical voice intoned, faintly distorted through the tunnel walls. But the labyrinth is only beginning. Van Helsing pressed forward, pausing only to recalibrate his gauntlet device, noting the increasing density of mechanical and arcane traps. Every corridor, every junction, every beam of light could conceal a threat, and he treated each with the same scrutiny he had applied for centuries. Hours passed, though time in the tunnels seemed elastic, measured only by the rhythm of rotating gears, the hiss of steam, and the pulsing energy of arcane devices. Van Helsing's endurance was tested repeatedly. Minor supernatural creatures required precise timing and reflexive strikes. Steam-powered constructs demanded both brute force and tactical awareness. Arcane lattices forced him to combine centuries of magical knowledge with mechanical ingenuity. Yet, despite the exhaustion, he pressed onward, mapping the underbelly of the city in his mind. each encounter adding to the mental grid he would need to navigate the final gauntlet. As he emerged into a wider chamber, the walls lined with copper piping and glowing glyphs, Van Helsing paused, scanning for both traps and mechanical sentries. The faint metallic whine of approaching constructs reached his ears, and from the shadows a massive hybrid creature surged forward, part flesh, part gear, steam vents along its back hissing in anticipation. Van Helsing sidestepped, slashing at one limb while deploying a small arcane charge at its core. Sparks and energy erupted, and the creature reeled, giving him a narrow window to move past and continue deeper into the Third Master's labyrinth. By the time he reached the next junction, Van Helsing's clothes were smeared with oil and soot, muscles aching from repeated exertion, and his mind strained to maintain focus, yet each obstacle overcome sharpened his instincts, refining the combination of combat, strategy, and arcane manipulation required to continue. The gauntlet set by the Third Master was unrelenting, but Van Helsing's centuries of experience had prepared him for this relentless test of body, mind, and perception. The final passage of the night opened into a chamber filled with suspended chains, spinning cogs, and arcane glyphs embedded in every surface. Van Helsing crouched, tracing the energy lines with his monocle, planning each step with meticulous care. A faint hiss and a metallic click warned him of an approaching mechanical sentinel. Its optics glowing bright, he rolled forward, striking the sentinel with a precise swing of his sword, sending sparks into the dimly lit chamber. The arcane devices pulsed, threatening to discharge, but he timed a release of counter-energy through his gauntlet, neutralizing the trap. As he paused to catch his breath, a mechanical voice resonated through the chamber, almost conversational, almost human. "You are persistent, but persistence alone will not save you." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, adjusting the lenses of his monocle to survey the remaining corridors. Every pulse of his device confirmed the presence of hidden devices, minor supernatural entities, and mechanical decoys, all lying in wait for the slightest misstep. He moved forward, muscles tense, senses heightened, every step a blend of caution and calculated aggression. By the end of the night, Van Helsing had neutralized or avoided every threat, leaving a trail of disabled automatons, disrupted arcane devices, and subdued minor supernatural creatures in his wake. The underworld had proven deadly, but each encounter had further sharpened his reflexes and strategic acumen, preparing him for the even greater challenges that awaited deeper in the Third Master's domain. Through the twisting corridors of New York's industrial underbelly, Van Helsing moved with unwavering focus, every step measured and precise. Rusted girders, rattling catwalks, and leaking steam pipes created a disorienting maze, punctuated by the hiss of pressurized air and the metallic clang of unseen machinery. Shadows shifted unnaturally in the dim light, and faint, pulsating glyphs traced patterns across the walls, hinting at magical traps that would strike without warning. From the darkness ahead, human agents emerged, faces hidden behind brass goggles and scarves, rifles bristling with modifications that hinted at both steam power and arcane energy. "You shouldn't have come here," one shouted, his voice distorted by a mechanical speaker embedded in his chest. Steam hissed from vents nearby, timed perfectly with the first discharge of an arcane-powered firearm. Van Helsing rolled to the side, narrowly avoiding the blast as it seared a crate behind him. Fingers brushed the crystalline core of his forearm device, which pulsed faintly in response to residual arcane energy. A thin, glimmering line of magical force traced beneath the floor, revealing a hidden tripwire. With careful steps he bypassed it, pivoting just as one of the agents lunged forward with a spring-loaded blade. Van Helsing's mechanical sword intercepted the attack, shattering the mechanism in a shower of sparks. "Predictable," he muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the remaining enemies. A hiss echoed from a side tunnel, drawing his attention. A minor supernatural creature, thin and elongated, slithered forward on clawed hands dipped with iridescent talons. Its serpentine face twisted in a predatory snarl as its eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. A swift strike from Van Helsing's gauntlet severed one arm, and a pulse of residual energy neutralized the creature's magical aura, sending sparks and ethereal mist into the air. "Every step anticipated," he whispered, circling to maintain a strategic advantage. The corridors opened into an abandoned warehouse. Piles of crates formed a labyrinth, and hidden constructs lurched from the shadows. Quadrupedal automatons with rotating saws, clockwork guardians bristling with spikes, and ethereal apparitions tethered to arcane cores. Van Helsing moved swiftly, weaving between crates, parrying attacks and calculating every possible line of assault. The air vibrated with the hum of magic and machinery, each pulse a clue to the traps laid throughout the room. "Impressive," a metallic voice echoed from a hidden speaker, distorted and taunting. "Your centuries of experience mean nothing here." Van Helsing scanned the high rafters, noting a series of arcane glyphs along a beam, poised to trigger deadly consequences if disturbed. Adjusting the lenses of his mechanical monocle, he synchronized his movements with the rhythm of the glyphs, stepping precisely to avoid activating them. From the far end, a coordinated group of human adversaries advanced. One hurled a mechanical grenade imbued with arcane energy. Anticipating its trajectory, Van Helsing deflected it with a precise strike from his gauntlet, sending it harmlessly into a pile of crates. Explosions sent smoke and debris into the air, obscuring vision and scattering the attackers. A second agent lunged with a spring-loaded blade, but Van Helsing's counterstrike shattered the mechanism, leaving the assailant pinned against a stack of barrels. A clockwork hybrid, half machine and half human, surged from the shadows, limbs whirring with gears and pistons. Van Helsing ducked beneath the first swing, slicing a forearm with his mechanical sword, while simultaneously sending a calibrated pulse from his gauntlet, overloading the construct's internal circuits. Sparks and smoke erupted as the machine collapsed in a heap, twitching under the residual arcane interference. Every corridor demanded constant vigilance. Arcane glyphs shifted subtly along floors and walls, triggering mechanical or magical responses if touched. Minor supernatural entities darted from alcoves, appearing and disappearing in flashes of movement. Van Helsing's monocle illuminated their traces, allowing him to neutralize threats with precise strikes or pulses of energy. Reflexes honed over centuries guided every move, but even that was not enough. Strategy and observation were equally critical. Steam vents hissed unpredictably, gears rotated in intricate patterns, and the faint glow of arcane cores guided both threats and opportunities. Van Helsing leapt across catwalks, rolled beneath swinging contraptions, and used walls and crates to block incoming attacks. Every footstep was deliberate, each swing measured, as the labyrinth seemed designed to punish any lapse in focus. "Persistent but foolish," a distorted voice called from a concealed speaker. Van Helsing tightened his grip on his sword, eyes scanning the shifting shadows. A mechanical serpentine creature, etched with glowing runes, lunged from the side. He countered with a rapid gauntlet pulse, shattering its energy core and causing the construct to collapse into a smoking pile. The voice hissed again, this time with frustration, echoing faintly through the warehouse. "Your skill is notable, but the gauntlet has only begun." Corridors twisted further, tunnels narrowed, and overhead catwalks creaked under their own weight. Human agents reappeared in coordinated ambushes, each carrying steampunk rifles with arcane amplification. Van Helsing rolled, sidestepped, and struck with precise timing, disabling gauntlets and shattering weapons before they could fire. Minor supernatural creatures emerged alongside them, each dispatched with equal efficiency. A faint, eerie whistle cut through the air as a hidden automaton perched atop a catwalk released a volley of tiny darts tipped with magical energy. Van Helsing spun, deflecting three with the edge of his mechanical sword and crushing another with his gauntlet. Sparks ricocheted off nearby pipes, and the sound of tearing metal echoed as he leapt from crate to crate. "Not clever enough," he muttered under his breath, eyes narrowing as he calculated his next move. A human agent advanced, shouting, "You will die here, witch hunter." He swung a massive spring-loaded hammer imbued with arcane runes. Van Helsing ducked low, felt the wind of the strike brush past his head, and drove his sword upward into the agent's mechanical gauntlet, disabling the runic mechanism. The agent stumbled backward, crashing into crates that toppled with a deafening crash. By dawn, Van Helsing had cleared multiple sectors. Muscles fatigued but senses razor-sharp, every engagement leaving him more aware of the Third Master's strategies. Mechanical and supernatural threats had been neutralized, human adversaries subdued or incapacitated, and the subtle manipulations of the industrial labyrinth laid bare. Each action, each narrowly avoided trap, contributed to a growing map of the labyrinth, a mental blueprint of the gauntlet still ahead. Finally, he paused in a chamber where vertical gears spun, pulleys rotated, and glyphs pulsed faintly with magical energy. A minor supernatural sentinel emerged, its body twisted with runes and metal augmentations. A swift strike severed its limbs, and a gauntlet pulse neutralized residual arcane energy. The distorted, omnipresent voice of the Third Master rang through the chamber. "You adapt quickly, but adaptability alone will not save you." Van Helsing allowed himself a brief moment to observe the environment. Rusted chains hanging from overhead beams, faint steam leaking from pressure valves, and shadows that shifted unnaturally as if watching him. Every corner, every darkened space could conceal a trap, an agent, or a supernatural horror. He crouched low, scanning the floor for residual glyph energy, noting that even minor disturbances could trigger cascading effects. Every move, every observation, and every narrowly avoided threat reinforced the lesson. The gauntlet combined human, mechanical, and supernatural forces into a single, relentless challenge. Survival required combat skill, strategic foresight, and mastery of both arcane and industrial systems honed over centuries. The labyrinth was not merely a physical challenge, but a test of intellect, endurance, and perception. Van Helsing's breath came in measured gasps as he crouched behind a stack of rusted crates, eyes scanning every inch of the warehouse. He traced the arc of a swinging pulley, noted the pressure valves hissing sporadically, and marked the subtle glow of residual arcane energy pulsing along the floorboards. Every detail, loose rivets, shifting shadows, and the faint hum of magical currents, was a potential hazard, a trap waiting for the unwary. Even the smallest oversight could turn a narrow victory into a fatal mistake, and centuries of experience had taught him the value of meticulous observation. Each success, each narrowly avoided strike or cleverly bypassed device, sharpened his focus. The mechanical and arcane labyrinth had been designed to break pursuers, to force them into mistakes under pressure. Yet with every trap disarmed, every supernatural creature neutralized, Van Helsing felt a grim satisfaction. The gauntlet was teaching him the patterns of his adversary, revealing both the master's ingenuity and his limits. He adjusted his gauntlet, checking the calibration of its detection lenses and the pulse of his mechanical sword, preparing for the next wave of threats that undoubtedly lay in wait beyond the next corridor. The warehouse had tested him relentlessly, pushing endurance, intellect, and reflexes to their extremes. Yet Van Helsing emerged from the chamber with a heightened awareness, muscles taut but mind sharper than ever. The third master's cunning would only escalate from here, each step forward promising more complex traps, deadlier constructs, and subtler manipulations. But for the first time in hours, Van Helsing allowed himself a brief, measured exhale, acknowledging that while the gauntlet had been punishing, he was more prepared than ever to face the escalating dangers that awaited deeper within the master's domain. The corridors narrowed, twisting into a claustrophobic network of pipes, scaffolding, and conveyor belts. Shadows pooled in the corners, shifting unnaturally under the dim, flickering light of arcane-infused lanterns. Each step forward carried weight, not merely physical but strategic. Every creak of metal or hiss of steam might conceal the third master's next test. Van Helsing advanced cautiously, the pulse of his forearm device steady in his grip, guiding him through subtle distortions in residual energy that hinted at hidden traps. Encoded signals appeared with increasing frequency, etched into steel supports and along the walls with a combination of mechanical precision and magical flourish. Each marking was a puzzle, a layered riddle meant to test both intellect and patience. Van Helsing crouched beneath an overhead catwalk, fingers tracing a glyph glowing faintly with residual arcane energy. "Not just warnings," he murmured, "but a map of intent. Every pattern tells a story if you know how to read it." His mechanical monocle adjusted automatically, lenses scanning for invisible lines of force threading through the industrial sprawl. A faint shimmer marked the trajectory of a tripwire running between two overhead beams. The device beeped softly, confirming his deduction. A sudden hiss from a nearby vent drew his attention. A minor supernatural creature, small and sinewy, with clawed limbs tipped in phosphorescent talons, slithered along the pipework above him. Van Helsing pivoted, firing a short pulse from his gauntlet that shattered its limbs midair. Sparks and a faint greenish mist filled the corridor as the creature collapsed to the floor. Every inch watched, a metallic voice crackled from an unseen speaker, distorted and mocking. Every decision anticipated. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. Anticipated, yes, but not infallible. He stepped over the creature's body, adjusting his trajectory to avoid a concealed tripwire beneath a loose grate. Ahead, a mechanical decoy resembling a human agent lurched from behind a stack of crates. Pistons hissed and gears whirred as it lunged forward with a spring-loaded blade. Van Helsing sidestepped, parrying with his mechanical sword and shattering the contraption in a shower of sparks. "Impressive reflexes," a distorted voice intoned from a hidden speaker. "But the master has more tricks in store," Van Helsing muttered under his breath. "And I have more tricks in return," as he crouched and traced a sequence of glyphs along the wall, deciphering the arcane logic linking several hidden pressure plates. With careful timing, he adjusted the floor panels, deactivating 2 additional hidden traps without triggering them. The air grew hotter as he descended into a lower chamber. the metallic tang of ozone mixing with the acrid scent of steam and burning oil. Conveyor belts twisted through the room like serpents, carrying crates marked with both arcane sigils and mechanical insignias. Van Helsing advanced cautiously, leaping over snapping pneumatic pistons and rolling beneath swinging chains coated in residual magical energy. Each movement required calculation and timing, a ballet of muscle, reflex, and intellect. From the shadows, human adversaries emerged, faces hidden behind brass goggles and respirators, weapons bristling with both mechanical and arcane modifications. "You'll find no easy path," one shouted, voice amplified and distorted by an embedded speaker. Arcane bolts flared from his rifle, narrowly missing Van Helsing as he rolled aside, sending sparks into a stack of crates that toppled with a deafening crash. Van Helsing's gauntlet fired a short, calibrated pulse that disabled the weapon's energy core, causing it to sputter and die. He then swept a hand across the floor, deploying a small, silent arcane disruptor that neutralized residual energy traps embedded along the corridor. Mechanical constructs lurked in every shadow, quadrupedal automata with rotating saws, clockwork guardians, bristling with spikes, and hybrid clockwork beast creatures tethered to arcane cores. Van Helsing moved fluidly, weaving between machinery and crates, parrying attacks with his mechanical sword and striking at the joints of his enemies with calculated precision. Sparks flew, metal clanged, and arcane energy danced along the walls as the room became a chaotic symphony of violence. A sudden shift in air pressure signaled a hidden trap triggering, a floor plate descending rapidly toward spikes. Van Helsing leapt, twisting in midair to land on a scaffold overhead. Below, the mechanical floor collapsed harmlessly into a pit, revealing a set of arcane glyphs pulsing faintly beneath the metal. "Clever," he muttered, "but predictable in its patterns." He marked the sequence mentally, tracing invisible lines connecting several traps, and realized he could navigate the chamber without further incident by stepping only on safe areas. The encoded warnings became more intricate, often layered over mundane industrial symbols or etched subtly into rusted beams. One beam bore scratches forming a barely noticeable sequence which, when combined with the faint glow of nearby arcane residues, revealed a safe route through a corridor lined with spring-loaded blades and energy pulses. Van Helsing's fingers brushed over his forearm device, syncing it with the pulses to track subtle distortions in the environment. Each glyph, each vibration was a breadcrumb toward the Third Master's inner sanctum. A distorted voice echoed through the chamber, every move anticipated, every breath calculated. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed as he scanned the shadows. From above, a clockwork bird released a small, spiked projectile. Van Helsing flipped to the side, slicing the spike mid-flight with his mechanical sword. He rolled to his feet, throwing a short arcane pulse that disabled the bird, sending it spiraling into a pile of crates. "You adapt well," the voice continued. "But adaptation alone will not save you." Corridors opened into a vast industrial hall, filled with massive gears, rotating shafts, and pulsing arcane cores. Conveyor belts twisted overhead, and stacks of crates formed labyrinthine pathways. The air vibrated with residual magic, machinery grunted under pressure, and the faint hiss of steam punctuated the tension. Van Helsing advanced carefully, using his monocle to trace faint lines of magical energy that revealed hidden tripwires and concealed mechanisms. A small serpentine construct with glowing runes leapt from the shadows, its claws cutting arcs through the air. Van Helsing's gauntlet pulsed, shattering the construct mid-leap, sending sparks and ethereal mist into the surrounding space. From the far end of the hall, human agents emerged, coordinating their attacks with subtle gestures and mechanical whistles. One hurled an arcane grenade, spinning with residual energy. Van Helsing caught the object mid-air with a magnetic gauntlet attachment, deflecting it into a wall where it exploded harmlessly. He pivoted, striking with his mechanical sword to disable two more approaching agents, their weapons collapsing under precise blows. Hours passed, the industrial labyrinth proving relentless. Every corridor, every room, every trap demanded constant vigilance. Van Helsing paused briefly in a control alcove, studying the network of pipes and gears, calculating timing sequences for upcoming mechanical hazards. The encoded signals had guided him, revealing patterns in the Third Master's planning. Each trap neutralized, each construct destroyed, and each adversary overcome added clarity to the chaotic puzzle. Finally, he reached a narrow passageway lined with arcane glyphs pulsing faintly with energy. A minor supernatural sentinel slithered from the shadows, its elongated limbs tipped with iridescent talons. Van Helsing ducked a strike, delivering a precise blow with his gauntlet, neutralizing both the creature and the residual energy in its path. The distorted voice echoed one last time through the labyrinth. You move with skill, but skill alone cannot breach the sanctum. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, and he stepped forward, the passageway opening to the threshold of the inner sanctum. Every step, every pulse of his device, and every narrowly avoided trap reinforced a single truth. The Third Master's labyrinth was as much a test of intellect as of endurance and combat. The encoded signals, mechanical threats, and arcane devices had forced Van Helsing to combine centuries of experience with adaptive thinking. Each calculated move had brought him closer to the inner sanctum, preparing him for the final confrontation that would demand every ounce of his longevity, reflexes, and intellect. The last stretch of the labyrinth opened into a massive, dimly lit hall. Steel girders twisted overhead like the ribs of some industrial beast, and the air smelled of ozone, oil, and faintly burning magic. Conveyor belts snaked across the floor and hung from above, forming a chaotic network of motion that seemed almost alive. Van Helsing moved with deliberate caution, every footstep calculated, every breath measured. He paused to trace a series of faintly glowing glyphs along the walls, deciphering their subtle warnings. "Careful, every path is a test," a distorted metallic voice echoed through the hall. It was the Third Master's signature mockery, omnipresent yet invisible. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, mechanical monocles scanning for hidden tripwires and concealed constructs. "Tests are meant to be passed," he muttered under his breath, "and I intend to pass them all." A steam-powered sentinel emerged from the shadows, its brass limbs whirring, gears clicking with unnerving precision. Van Helsing pivoted, slicing through the machine's reinforced arm with his mechanical sword. Sparks flew, and the sentinel collapsed with a hiss of venting steam. Another construct leapt from the rafters, a hybrid of steel and arcane energy, its limbs glowing with ethereal light. Van Helsing ducked beneath its swing, sending a calibrated pulse from his gauntlet that disrupted its arcane core. The machine shuddered and fell into a heap, smoke curling from the ruptured circuits. "Predictable," a hidden speaker hissed, voice dripping with amusement. "But you adapt quickly, perhaps too quickly." Van Helsing didn't respond, but his mind raced. Every encounter had sharpened his reflexes and forced him to anticipate the Master's strategy, yet the Third Master himself remained a phantom, always one step ahead. "You think you've found a pattern," the voice continued. "But the pattern is mine to define." Across the hall, a narrow walkway suspended above spinning gears revealed another trap. Pressure plates linked to arcane charges. Van Helsing paused, eyes narrowing as he calculated timing and energy flow. "You're clever," he muttered aloud, more to himself than to the unseen master. "But cleverness alone won't be enough to stop me." He shifted his weight, rolling across the floor just as a pulse of magical energy flared along the walkway, neutralized by the precise placement of his mechanical shields. A minor supernatural creature lunged from behind a stack of crates, thin and elongated, claws tipped with iridescent talons. Van Helsing blocked its attack with his gauntlet, countering with a sweep of arcane energy that neutralized the creature mid-leap. Sparks and a faint greenish mist filled the hall. "Every step you take," the metallic voice whispered mockingly, "is watched." Van Helsing's lips curled into a grim smirk. "And every observation I make," he replied, "counts against you." From a shadowed alcove, human agents appeared, rifles bristling with arcane enhancements and spring-loaded mechanisms. "You won't survive this hall," one shouted, voice warped by his embedded speaker. Van Helsing sidestepped an incoming volley using a rotating gear as cover. He hurled a small arcane disruptor, disabling the nearest weapon and sending the agent stumbling backward. A second agent lunged with a spring-loaded blade, but Van Helsing intercepted it with a quick sweep of his mechanical sword, shattering the device. "Predictable," he said, voice low as he pressed forward. The floor itself seemed alive, shifting slightly underfoot, revealing hidden mechanisms designed to crush or impale the unwary. Van Helsing adjusted his steps, keeping a careful rhythm to avoid activating traps. Arcane glyphs pulsed faintly on the walls and floor, the energy patterns growing more complex as he advanced. "You see," the metallic voice taunted, "every step you take has been prepared for you, every reaction anticipated." Van Helsing's eyes flicked to a small console nearby, and with a flick of his wrist he triggered a pulse that disrupted several hidden tripwires. Sparks erupted, and a faint whine of disrupted machinery echoed through the hall. Above him, a clockwork bird released a barrage of small spinning projectiles, each etched with runes designed to explode on contact. Van Helsing rolled beneath the first wave, slicing through several spikes mid-flight with precision. A pulse from his gauntlet neutralized residual energy, and the bird spiraled into a pile of crates. "Impressive," the metallic voice admitted, though the distortion made it sound almost reluctant. "But the Master himself remains unseen. You are dancing through my theater of shadows, and soon the stage will change." A sudden hiss drew Van Helsing's attention to the far end of the hall. A serpentine construct, mechanical yet imbued with arcane energy, slithered toward him, claws scraping against metal. He sidestepped, firing a calculated pulse from his gauntlet that disrupted the construct's energy core. Sparks and smoke filled the hall. Van Helsing's mechanical sword cut a swath through a secondary threat. A quadrupedal automaton with rotating saws mounted on its back. Adaptable, the metallic voice murmured. But can you adapt fast enough when the final piece reveals itself? Every corridor he had navigated, every trap he had disarmed, and every minor adversary he had defeated had led to this moment. The encoded signals now pointed clearly to the inner chamber, the sanctum where the third master awaited, or rather where the master might appear. Van Helsing studied the glyphs along the walls, the faint hum of energy in the air, and the subtle mechanical patterns embedded into the floor and ceiling. Each was a clue, a breadcrumb trail designed to sharpen the mind as much as challenge the body. He crouched near a series of interconnected pulleys, adjusting his monocle to trace the faint threads of residual energy. "You hide behind machines, shadows, and magic," he muttered softly. "But hiding is not winning." A spring-loaded trap activated, sending a volley of small blades whistling through the air. Van Helsing rolled aside, slicing the blades mid-flight with his mechanical sword. He stood, pulse steady, breathing measured. "Soon, master," he said aloud. "We will meet." The hall opened onto a wide platform overlooking the lower chambers of the industrial labyrinth. Massive gears rotated slowly beneath, arcane energy coiling like smoke along the shafts. Van Helsing stepped carefully, noting every possible path, every potential hazard, every subtle fluctuation in magical energy. Mechanical sentries lurked in shadowed alcoves, while minor supernatural creatures slithered along railings and pipes, each neutralized before they could strike. The metallic voice spoke once more. "Every advantage you think you hold is borrowed. The final challenge will reveal your limits." Van Helsing paused, surveying the gauntlet that had brought him to this point. "Limits," he said, voice low and resolute, "are meant to be tested, not obeyed." He adjusted his forearm device, syncing it with the remaining glyphs and energy pulses in the hall. His muscles ached, but his mind remained sharp, honed by centuries of similar trials. Each encoded warning had been interpreted, each mechanical threat neutralized, each supernatural adversary dispatched. The path forward was clear, yet perilous. A distant, distorted chuckle echoed, bouncing off the steel walls. Clever, resourceful, patient. But all preparation is meaningless when the final move is unseen. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. "Then I will learn it when the time comes," he replied. He moved forward, every sense attuned, every step deliberate. The gauntlet had tested his body and mind, but he remained resolute, ready for the final confrontation yet to come. The industrial labyrinth stretched ahead, filled with shifting shadows, arcane traps, and mechanical horrors. Van Helsing's breath was steady, his focus absolute. Every pulse of his device, every flicker of glyphs, and every movement of the remaining constructs reinforced one truth. The third master was elusive, cunning, and unpredictable. But he had already sharpened Van Helsing's reflexes, intellect, and resolve. Stepping onto a narrow catwalk overlooking a pit of rotating gears, Van Helsing muttered, "You remain hidden, master, but your trail is mine. Every trick, every shadow, every construct, it all leads forward, and I will be ready when you show yourself." The metallic voice hissed faintly from hidden speakers, distant but omnipresent. "We shall see, Hunter, we shall see." With that, Van Helsing pressed forward, muscles coiled, eyes scanning and mind calculating. The gauntlet of horrors had honed him, but the ultimate challenge, the final confrontation with the elusive third master, remained ahead. He had survived the traps, deciphered the signals, and overcome every subordinate threat. Now he stood on the threshold, ready to enter the final battlefield, fully aware that the master himself could strike at any moment, testing every ounce of his longevity, reflexes, and intellect. The entrance to the third master's lair yawned like the maw of some industrial leviathan, a steel-lined archway leading into darkness that smelled of oil, ozone, and faintly burning arcane residue. Van Helsing paused at the threshold, senses straining, every nerve alert. His mechanical monocle swept across the walls, lenses adjusting to detect faint traces of glyphs, tripwires, and residual magical pulses. "Here it begins," he muttered, voice low, almost lost beneath the hiss of venting steam from pipes overhead. Every step calculated, every trap deliberate. Inside, the corridors twisted unnaturally. Gears the size of small buildings turned above him, connected to pistons that hissed in precise rhythmic bursts. Steam vents punctuated the hallways, releasing scalding plumes at irregular intervals. Arcane sigils glimmered faintly along floor and ceiling. some appearing as mirrors of themselves, a visual trick designed to confuse intruders. Van Helsing's boots clicked against metal grating as he moved, the sound swallowed by the industrial roar, yet he noted every vibration, every echo, every anomaly. A flicker of movement caught his eye. From a shadowed alcove, a minor construct emerged. A thin, serpentine machine etched with glowing runes, its limbs whirring with gears and pistons. It lunged with terrifying speed, claws aimed at Van Helsing's chest. He ducked, gauntlet firing a pulse that overloaded its circuits. Sparks and a faint mist of arcane energy filled the air. "You adapt quickly," a metallic, distorted voice intoned from hidden speakers. "But this is only the beginning." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. "Quickly enough to survive," he muttered. He moved forward, stepping carefully around a series of glowing glyphs that pulsed in sync with nearby pistons. The corridor seemed alive, machinery and magic entwined to punish even a moment's lapse in attention. Pipes hissed, gears rotated, and hidden mechanisms clicked as if waiting for the wrong step. Each breath he took was measured, each motion deliberate. From above, a spring-loaded platform tipped, sending a barrage of razor-edged discs spinning along the floor. Van Helsing rolled to the side, slicing the first few with his mechanical sword while dodging the rest. The shards clanged against metal beams, some ricocheting dangerously close to his legs. He pressed a hidden button on his forearm device, sending a pulse that temporarily disabled the nearest trap. "Every hazard," he muttered under his breath. A lesson in timing and observation. Another corridor branched off, dimly lit by hanging lanterns that flickered under the influence of residual magic. A group of human agents appeared, faces obscured by brass goggles and respirators, rifles bristling with arcane amplifiers. "You shouldn't be here," one shouted. Mechanical speaker warping his voice, Van Helsing's hand swept across the crystalline core embedded in his gauntlet, sending a pulse that short-circuited the first rifle before it fired. He ducked under the second shot, rolling behind a steel crate. "Predictable," he muttered, striking a precise blow to the nearest agent with his mechanical sword, shattering the spring-loaded blade mechanism. The lair seemed endless. Twisting staircases, rotating platforms, and sliding walls created a dizzying maze. Arcane glyphs shifted subtly as he passed, some turning to reveal previously invisible traps. Minor supernatural creatures darted from the shadows, elongated and twisted forms, each tipped with claws or fangs imbued with magical energy. Van Helsing's reflexes, honed over centuries, met each threat with measured counterattacks. Gauntlet pulses neutralized arcane enhancements, while blades and strikes dismantled mechanical limbs. "Every step anticipated, yet never fully predictable," he whispered, circling to maintain spatial awareness. A low hiss echoed from above. He glanced upward, spotting a mechanical serpent construct coiled around a girder, glowing runes along its segmented body. It struck with startling speed. Van Helsing leapt to the side, gauntlet firing a pulse that disrupted the creature's energy core. The serpent crashed into a stack of crates, sparks flying, machinery whirring and grinding as residual energy short-circuited. From a hidden speaker, the voice hissed, this time layered with faint laughter. "Impressive, but the gauntlet has only begun." The corridors opened into a vast chamber. Overhead, spinning gears rotated in time with pistons below, some capped with arcane sigils that glowed faintly. Steam hissed in timed bursts from multiple vents, creating pockets of scalding air. Van Helsing stepped lightly, scanning every beam, pipe, and surface for latent traps. A faint shimmer along the floor indicated residual arcane energy from a tripwire, which he disarmed with a precise pulse from his gauntlet. "Clever, but not clever enough," he muttered, scanning for the next threat. From the shadows, another wave of minor constructs surged forward, clockwork quadrupeds with rotating saws and serpentine hybrids coiling through the air. Van Helsing rolled beneath the first attacks, slicing the spinning blades mid-flight. A pulse from his gauntlet disrupted the arcane circuitry in the serpentine constructs, sending sparks and ethereal mist into the air. He could feel his muscles protesting, fatigue setting in, yet his mind remained sharp, noting patterns, timing, and the subtle flow of energy through the hall. "You think you've learned the path," the voice intoned, reverberating from hidden speakers. "But every success only sharpens the challenge ahead." Van Helsing pressed forward, boots sliding across metal grates, moving with a precision born of centuries of experience. He adjusted his mechanical monocle, lenses catching faint residual traces of magic and highlighting hidden tripwires. Each pulse of energy, each whine of gears, each hiss of steam offered clues, revealing traps before they could strike. A sudden hiss drew his attention to a side tunnel. A human agent, augmented with clockwork limbs and arcane amplifiers, lunged with spring-loaded blades. Van Helsing intercepted with his mechanical sword, shattering the mechanism, and followed with a pulse that disrupted the energy in the limbs. The agent fell back with a grunt, clutching smoldering machinery. Persistent, the distorted voice called from somewhere above. But persistence alone will not prevail. The chamber stretched ahead into a twisting network of catwalks and platforms suspended over an abyss of rotating gears and arcane cores. Van Helsing advanced cautiously, noting every surface, every shift in energy. A mechanical crane overhead released a barrage of spinning discs, each glowing faintly with runes. He rolled, slicing the first few in midair, and sent a pulse to neutralize the remaining discs before they could detonate. "Your games are elaborate," he muttered under his breath. "But not impossible." Steam hissed, gears clanged, and minor supernatural creatures flitted along the railings attacking from above. Van Helsing ducked, rolled, and countered with precise gauntlet pulses and sword strikes. Sparks and mist filled the chamber as constructs fell, defeated, and arcane energy dissipated in glowing clouds. "Every movement," he said aloud, breathing steadily despite the exertion, "must be deliberate, calculated, and measured." Above him, the mechanical bird released a flurry of arcane projectiles. Van Helsing dodged, slicing through the projectiles with surgical precision, while a pulse from his gauntlet disabled its magical guidance. He scanned the upper levels for hidden sensors, noting their positions and predicting the master's likely next manipulations. Each hazard neutralized, each construct disabled, brought him one step closer to the inner sanctum. Finally, after what felt like hours of navigating deadly corridors, Van Helsing reached a small platform suspended over the lower gears. Residual arcane energy pulsed faintly beneath his feet, indicating the presence of traps yet to be revealed. "You linger," the distorted voice murmured, "but the final move has not yet been made." Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. "I am ready," he replied, voice firm. "Show yourself, master, or continue to hide while I advance." He crouched briefly, adjusting the lenses of his monocle to track every subtle movement, every flicker of magic, every mechanical quiver. Pipes hissed, gears groaned, and distant constructs stirred, yet no visible sign of the third master appeared. The labyrinth was a crucible, a test of his endurance, intellect, and reflexes, but it had also sharpened him, made him hyper-aware and ready for the confrontation yet to come. "Every path observed, every hazard noted," Van Helsing said softly, stepping forward onto the next catwalk. "I will meet you when the time comes. Your tricks, your traps, your constructs, they are all noted, and I will be ready." The voice did not respond immediately, only a faint metallic chuckle echoing from hidden speakers. "So confident, so certain, we shall see if certainty survives the final gambit," it hissed, fading into the shifting shadows of the labyrinth. Van Helsing moved on, boots clicking against the steel grates, mechanical sword at the ready, gauntlet primed, monocle scanning, every sense stretched to its limit. The third master remained unseen, elusive, and cunning, but the gauntlet had honed him, and every challenge surmounted reinforced one undeniable truth. He was ready for the confrontation, prepared to face the final master with every ounce of his longevity, intellect, and reflexes. The corridors of the lair twisted unpredictably. Steel and stone fused with arcane energy in a maze designed to disorient even the most experienced pursuer. Van Helsing's boots clanged softly against the grated floor, the vibrations alerting him to hidden mechanisms, each one primed to punish a misstep. Faint arcs of magical energy traced along the walls, flickering in patterns almost imperceptible, signaling both the presence of traps and the influence of the master himself. A sudden hiss drew his attention. A quadrupedal construct, its brass frame etched with glowing runes, burst from a side alcove, limbs moving with unnatural speed. Van Helsing's gauntlet discharged a pulse, sending a jolt through the creature's circuits. Sparks flew, and the metallic beast staggered but did not collapse. "Persistent, aren't we?" Van Helsing muttered, rolling to the side as the construct lunged again, claws tearing into steel girders instead of flesh. Another hiss, sharper and more deliberate, echoed from above. A pair of serpentine constructs descended along chains, bodies segmented like armored snakes, runes glowing along each segment. Van Helsing ducked beneath the first strike, slicing a limb clean off with his mechanical sword while his gauntlet emitted a calibrated shock that disrupted the energy flowing through the second. The constructs fell, jerking spasmodically as residual magic dissipated in sparks and mist. "You anticipate well," the distorted voice called from hidden speakers, mocking and metallic. "But do you understand the patterns yet?" Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. "Patterns are survival," he replied under his breath, moving forward, scanning the walls, ceiling, and floor for the faintest indication of hidden mechanisms. His monocle's lenses shimmered as glyphs and residual magical currents were illuminated, revealing tripwires and motion sensors almost invisible to the naked eye. Steam vents hissed on precise intervals, sending scorching plumes of air into the corridor. Van Helsing timed his steps to move with the rhythm of the releases, leaping across the intermittent bursts, sword slicing at minor constructs scuttling along the metal catwalks. One construct emitted a high-pitched whine, activating a small clockwork swarm of spider-like machines. Van Helsing dropped into a crouch, gauntlet-firing pulses in rapid succession, disintegrating the swarm mid-leap. "Ingenious," he muttered, "but predictable." A sudden explosion rocked the corridor. Crates filled with compressed arcane energy detonated, sending shards and magical sparks in all directions. Van Helsing ruled behind a sturdy support beam, mechanical sword cutting through the first shards mid-flight. Flames licked along the edges of the walls, but he adjusted a small dial on his gauntlet, emitting a cooling pulse that dissipated the worst of the heat. "Always a step ahead," he whispered, scanning the debris for lingering threats. From a raised platform, a human agent emerged, partially augmented with mechanical limbs and a respirator mask glowing faintly with arcane energy. "Stop," the agent shouted through a distorted speaker embedded in his chest. He lunged with spring-loaded blades spinning with impossible speed. Van Helsing intercepted with his sword, shattering the mechanism in a shower of sparks, and simultaneously sent a pulse through his gauntlet, neutralizing the agent's magical augmentations. The man staggered, clutching smoldering machinery, and collapsed. "This is not just brute force," Van Helsing muttered, noting the precision in every trap and adversary. "It's strategy. Every mechanism, every construct, his hand is evident." A faint shimmer along the floor revealed a new tripwire, nearly invisible to the eye but glowing under his monocle. Van Helsing adjusted his step, pivoted, and dismantled a nearby pressure plate with a quick strike of his gauntlet. The path cleared, yet the sense of being constantly watched pressed against his mind. The corridors narrowed, steam hissing through tight pipes overhead, creating pockets of near-blinding fog. Shadows moved with unnatural coordination. A hybrid creature, a fusion of flesh, machinery, and magic, lunged from a side passage, claws extended, talons sparking with energy. Van Helsing rolled beneath the first strike, swinging his sword to sever a mechanical limb while his gauntlet pulsed, neutralizing the magical flow sustaining the creature. It collapsed with a metallic shriek, twitching as the arcane energy dissipated. "You endure," the voice hissed from hidden speakers, now layered with multiple overlapping tones. "But endurance is not enough to unravel the labyrinth." Van Helsing's eyes scanned the high ceiling, noting the faint shimmer of wires connected to an arcane trap designed to release a burst of energy if disturbed. Timing and precision became critical. He leapt onto a platform above, carefully cutting the wires, while simultaneously avoiding a cascade of spinning blades from another corridor. Sparks flew, metal twisted, and he landed lightly, surveying the next sector. A sudden flurry of movement along the walls drew his attention. Mechanical spiders, clockwork hybrids, and arcane wisps emerged simultaneously. Van Helsing's gauntlet discharged, disrupting the magical cores of the nearest threats. He swung his mechanical sword, slicing through the first wave of constructs, then rolled under a descending mechanical limb, sending a counterpulse to neutralize energy flowing through the second. Each action required calculation, reflex, and foresight. He paused briefly, crouched behind a support beam, chest heaving slightly as he scanned the labyrinthine corridors. Every path twisted unexpectedly, and yet the arrangement of traps and constructs bore the unmistakable signature of the third master. "Cunning," Van Helsing murmured. "Not just strength or numbers, but foresight. Every obstacle designed to test both body and mind." A sudden hiss and metallic whine announced the arrival of another wave of threats. Steam-powered quadrupeds lunged from hidden alcoves, their limbs serrated, bodies glowing faintly with arcane energy. Van Helsing rolled to the side, blade slicing through the nearest construct, gauntlet pulsing to overload the arcane circuitry of the next. Sparks and a faint mist of magical energy filled the corridor as constructs collapsed. The smell of ozone mixed with the metallic tang of steam and scorched machinery. "You move with skill," the voice hissed, now echoing from multiple hidden sources. "But skill alone cannot predict the mind behind the labyrinth." Van Helsing smirked faintly, ducking beneath a swinging blade, gauntlet pulsing in tandem with a precise strike of his sword. "The mind may guide the traps," he replied under his breath, "but experience guides survival." From a hidden overhead platform, a human agent equipped with a modified steam rifle fired a concentrated burst of energy. Van Helsing dove to the side, the shot blasting a crater in the steel floor behind him. He rolled forward, gauntlet discharging a pulse that shorted the rifle's mechanism, sending the agent sprawling. "Your gadgets are clever," Van Helsing muttered, scanning for further traps. "But cleverness is not enough without observation." A low hiss echoed from the ceiling. Van Helsing looked up to see a serpentine construct, its body coiled along a series of chains. glowing runes tracing its segmented frame. It struck with lightning speed. He ducked beneath the first lunge, sending a counterpulse through its arcane core, while slicing through a segment of its mechanical body. Sparks and smoke filled the corridor, the hiss of steam mixing with the faint shriek of residual energy. The corridors narrowed again, forcing him into tight spaces where every movement was a test of precision. Arcane glyphs pulsed faintly, some now concealed within the walls, their energy ready to trigger mechanical or magical hazards. Van Helsing adjusted his monocle, tracing residual currents with lenses that illuminated hidden traps. He moved with deliberate steps, rolling under swinging mechanisms, slicing constructs before they could strike, and sending pulses to neutralize magical enhancements. "You learn quickly," the voice intoned, layered with a faint metallic chuckle. "But learning does not grant foresight beyond the labyrinth." Van Helsing pressed forward, gauntlet ready, sword in hand, every sense tuned to detect even the slightest anomaly. Steam hissed, blades spun, and mechanical limbs lunged from hidden alcoves. Each confrontation was not only a test of strength but a puzzle demanding rapid calculation, tactical improvisation, and precision. Minutes stretched into hours as he moved through the maze of machinery, arcane traps, and constructs. Each step forward revealed more of the labyrinth's intricate design. Hidden pulleys, rotating platforms, arcane conduits, and minor supernatural entities. Van Helsing dispatched each threat with surgical efficiency, noting patterns, timing, and energy flows. Every pulse of his gauntlet and swing of his sword reinforced his understanding of the Third Master's methodology. Finally, after navigating a particularly dense sector filled with overlapping threats, steam-powered constructs, serpentine hybrids, and human agents equipped with arcane-imbued weapons, Van Helsing paused briefly, catching his breath, scanning the corridor ahead. Each narrow victory had honed his reflexes and intellect, revealing the Third Master's meticulous planning and foresight. "Every obstacle," he murmured, "every trap, a reflection of the mind I pursue, and I will meet it as calculated as it is." The deeper Van Helsing pressed into the labyrinth, the more intricate the lair became. Gears and pistons meshed with arcane conduits, creating walls that shifted unpredictably, floors that tilted without warning, and ceilings that released steam or energy in precise punishing bursts. Faint pulses of magic lingered in the air, some residual, some actively maintained to snare, injure, or mislead. Every corner held a hidden adversary, every shadow a potential ambush. A low mechanical whine signaled the approach of the first guardian in this deeper sector. A quadrupedal automaton, limbs dipped with serrated blades, arcane cores glowing a harsh blue. Van Helsing rolled beneath a swinging arm, gauntlet discharging a precise pulse that sent the energy coursing through the construct's circuitry. Sparks erupted as its limbs froze mid-motion, then collapsed in a heap. "Clever but too linear," he muttered, stepping lightly over the remains. From above, a serpentine hybrid coiled along a chain, its segmented body glowing with runes. It lunged, fangs snapping, claws whirling. Van Helsing pivoted, slicing a segment from its body with his mechanical sword, while simultaneously sending a pulse from his gauntlet that shorted the runic energy. The creature fell with a hiss of steam and the scent of ozone. "Every guardian has a pattern," he muttered. "Every weakness is deliberate." The corridor ahead opened into a chamber where mechanical arms rotated along overhead tracks, gears clicking and hissing, each arm terminated in a blade or arcane emitter, forming a deadly lattice designed to crush or incinerate any intruder. Van Helsing paused, scanning the mechanisms, tracing the faint trails of magical energy with his monocle. Timing became a game of precision. He leapt onto a platform, rolling beneath a descending arm, striking the next with a pulse that disrupted both magic and machinery, and vaulted to safety. "You adapt quickly," a distorted voice hissed from hidden speakers, layered with multiple overlapping tones. "But adaptation alone cannot unmake the labyrinth." Van Helsing's gaze swept the chamber. Arcane glyphs pulsed faintly across the walls, hinting at further mechanisms tied to both motion and energy. He moved deliberately, each footstep measured, each swing calculated, tracing patterns in the mechanical rotation to predict the next threat. A minor supernatural entity darted from a concealed alcove. Thin, elongated, with metallic protrusions along its spine, it moved unnaturally fast, claws snapping. Van Helsing's gauntlet fired in tandem with a precise slash from his sword, neutralizing both the construct and the magical aura surrounding it. Sparks and mist danced in the confined space, illuminating the labyrinth's complexity. "Persistent little pests," he muttered under his breath, eyes scanning for more. The walls shifted subtly, and with a soft hiss a concealed compartment opened. From within, a hybrid human agent emerged. limbs augmented with pistons and clawed gloves, arcane energy arcing faintly along his joints. "You should not have come this far," the agent spat. Launching a spring-loaded blade, Van Helsing rolled aside, slicing through the mechanism while his gauntlet pulsed to short the arcane circuit. The agent fell back, smoke curling from his limbs. Every step forward demanded observation, foresight, and rapid execution. Arcane devices lined the walls, their purpose initially hidden. Some channeled energy to nearby constructs, others powered traps calibrated to release bursts of flame or steam. Van Helsing adjusted dials on his gauntlet and mechanical sword, syncing pulses with residual energy flows to disarm these hazards before they could activate. A mechanical serpent slithered across the floor, coils bristling with runes. It lunged with impossible speed. Van Helsing dropped into a crouch, slicing through a section while simultaneously sending a pulse that disrupted its energy source. The beast collapsed with a hiss, sparks flying as the residual magic dissipated. "All calculated," he muttered. "Every enhancement, every runic overlay. Designed to confuse, to challenge." From a raised platform, a human agent hurled a grenade infused with arcane energy. Van Helsing timed the trajectory, slicing the device mid-flight with his sword, sending shards harmlessly into a side alcove. A second agent charged from behind a shifted wall panel, claws extended, mechanical pulse rifles aimed. Van Helsing's gauntlet discharged, shorting the rifle's circuitry while his sword deflected a spring-loaded blade. The agent cried out, stumbling back into a mechanism that slammed him against the wall, leaving him unconscious. "You are cautious," the master's voice, intoned, now layered from multiple concealed speakers, yet caution cannot outpace inevitability. Van Helsing's eyes tracked the faint energy pulses along the ceiling and floor, tracing the connection between glyphs and mechanical hazards. Each movement became a calculation of probability, reflexes, and arcane knowledge. Steam hissed unpredictably, rotating platforms shifted mid-step, and mechanical arms swung in intricate sequences. Minor supernatural entities, elongated, serpentine, some partially mechanized, emerged from hidden crevices. Van Helsing's monocle illuminated the faint traces of energy that powered each adversary. He dispatched them with precise strikes and pulses from his gauntlet, careful not to trigger linked mechanisms. Each action required calculation. A single misstep could release cascading hazards throughout the chamber. A series of human agents emerged simultaneously, coordinated in attack, weapons humming with arcane energy. Van Helsing ducked beneath a swinging mechanical arm, sending a counterpulse that disabled the nearest rifle, slicing through the next agent's mechanical augmentation with a precise swing. Sparks flew as the remaining assailants reeled, struggling to regain their footing in the chaotic environment. "You anticipate," the voice hissed, "but anticipation cannot substitute mastery over every eventuality." Van Helsing smirked faintly, adjusting his monocle to illuminate hidden glyphs. A quick assessment revealed several arcane devices linked to the Guardian constructs. He dispatched them with a combination of pulse and precision strike, collapsing the remaining threats into inert heaps. "Mastery," he muttered, "is earned, not inherited." The labyrinth narrowed further, forcing him into a tighter corridor filled with rotating blades and arcane sigils. Steam vents hissed along the walls, releasing scalding plumes with deadly timing. Van Helsing rolled beneath a blade, sending a pulse to short the energy in a nearby sigil, then vaulted over a vent to avoid the next burst. A mechanical quadruped lunged from a side alcove. He dispatched it with a swift slash gauntlet, neutralizing its energy core. From overhead, a serpentine hybrid descended along chains, coils bristling with glowing runes. Van Helsing leapt sideways, sending a precise pulse through his gauntlet, severing the energy connection, and striking the creature's metallic body with his sword. Sparks and mist erupted, briefly illuminating the maze of machinery and arcane devices that twisted around him like a living entity. "Resourceful," the master's voice intoned, now layered with distortion and echo, "yet even your longevity cannot anticipate every variation." Van Helsing's breath came in measured gasps as he surveyed the corridor, analyzing residual magical currents and mechanical vibrations. Every pulse of his device, every visual cue, contributed to a growing mental map of the labyrinth, each sector revealing the master's meticulous planning. A small clockwork hybrid agent emerged, spinning and leaping toward him with impossible agility. Van Helsing's sword met the first strike, shattering its mechanism, and a pulse from his gauntlet overloaded the arcane core. The agent collapsed, twitching as the magical energy dissipated. "They think enhancements make them superior," Van Helsing muttered. "But experience outweighs technology every time." Tongue blurred as he pressed deeper, every corridor, chamber and alcove presenting new variations of mechanical and arcane traps. Each encounter honed his reflexes, mental acuity, and endurance. Small serpentine constructs slithered between machinery, arcane glyphs glimmered faintly along walls, and human agents attacked in precise formations. Van Helsing countered with a blend of combat skill, tactical improvisation and arcane manipulation, exploiting every weakness he could detect. Finally, after hours of relentless navigation and combat, he paused briefly in a chamber where the air vibrated with residual energy. Rotating gears, swinging blades, and pulsing glyphs formed a deadly lattice. A minor supernatural sentinel lurked in the shadows, its body augmented with metallic and magical enhancements. Van Helsing struck decisively, his gauntlet and sword combining to neutralize the construct in a shower of sparks and arcane mist. He exhaled slowly, muscles burning, eyes scanning for further threats. Every encounter, every narrow escape, reinforced the lesson. The labyrinth was not merely physical, it was a test of intellect, endurance, and semi-cursed resilience. Every step forward, he muttered, is both challenge and preparation. The master's hand is evident everywhere, and I will meet it head-on. Chamber ahead opened like the maw of a mechanical beast, walls lined with spinning cogs, pistons and conduits pulsating with arcane energy. Steam kicked from vents at irregular intervals, and the floor itself shuddered with the rhythmic pounding of hidden machinery. Van Helsing's eyes traced the faint trails of magic etched into the surfaces, every glyph, line, and symbol revealing the hand of the third master. He stepped cautiously, each movement deliberate, muscles coiled for sudden action. From the shadows at the far end of the chamber, the master emerged, a figure draped in dark arcane-infused armor, a brass and leather contraption twisting around one arm glowing with crackling energy. "So," the master hissed, voice reverberating unnaturally, "the famous Van Helsing finally arrives. I wondered how long it would take for your persistence to bring you here." His eyes glinted with malice, and in his other hand he held a blade wreathed in faintly glowing runes. Van Helsing's fingers brushed his gauntlet, feeling the pulse of residual magic along the floor. "Persistence is all that keeps you honest," he muttered, eyes never leaving the master's movements. "And cunning, well, you have that in abundance." The master's laugh was metallic, echoing off the walls. In a swift motion he launched forward, arcane energy flaring along the floor, sending a wave of force toward Van Helsing. He rolled to the side, sword intercepting a set of spinning mechanical blades that emerged from the floor, scattering sparks as they shattered. A pulse from his gauntlet disabled a set of magical wards that had triggered in tandem, neutralizing the immediate threat. "You anticipate too well," the master hissed. Leaping onto a raised platform and swinging his rune blade in a sweeping arc, Van Helsing ducked beneath, countering with a strike from his mechanical sword that glanced off the edge of the master's armor. Sparks flew, and a counterpulse from the gauntlet shorted a small arcane circuit embedded in the armor's plating. The master grunted, stepping back, eyes narrowing with renewed calculation. The chamber itself was a weapon. Steam vents hissed unpredictably, chains swung with mechanical precision, and glyphs along the walls flared intermittently. Van Helsing timed his movements with the rhythm of the hazards, leaping over spinning cogs, rolling beneath swinging chains, and sending calculated pulses through arcane nodes to neutralize traps before they could trigger. "Every piece of this place," he muttered, "is an extension of him, every hazard a test." A mechanical hybrid sprang from a shadowed alcove, its limbs whirring with pistons and clawed extensions. Van Helsing's sword met its first strike, the clash ringing through the chamber. A pulse from his gauntlet overloaded the energy circuits, collapsing the construct into a smoking heap. "I could have done without the extras," he muttered, eyes scanning the master who was already repositioning. Leveraging the mechanical lattice overhead to swing into a higher vantage. "You've survived the gauntlet," the master called, voice dripping with mockery. "But you have yet to survive me." He fired a volley of arcane bolts, streaking like metallic lightning across the floor. Van Helsing twisted, deflecting two with his sword, and absorbed the third with a calibrated gauntlet pulse, redirecting the energy into a nearby conduit. Sparks exploded, illuminating the chamber with brief harsh light. The master's cunning was evident in every motion. He manipulated constructs, triggered traps remotely, and moved unpredictably, forcing Van Helsing to anticipate multiple threats simultaneously. Yet centuries of combat experience honed every reaction. Van Helsing ducked beneath an energy arc, countered with a pulse through a magical conduit, and rolled over a spinning gear to land behind a fallen construct. He delivered a precise strike to its arcane core, neutralizing it before it could recover. "Clever," the master growled, adjusting a dial on his armor. "But cleverness cannot replace strength. With a sudden movement, he hurled a mechanical quadruped across the chamber, claws extended and runes glowing. Van Helsing leapt aside, sword slicing through a limb mid-flight, while his gauntlet sent a pulse to scramble the construct circuitry before impact. They circled one another, the rhythmic hiss of steam and clatter of machinery punctuating the tense silence between strikes. The master lunged with his rune blade. Van Helsing parried, sparks cascading as metal met metal. A low hum from the chamber walls intensified, arcane energy coalescing into floating glyphs ready to release devastating force. Van Helsing's mechanical monocle illuminated the sequence. "I know your game," he muttered, sending a calibrated pulse through a floor node to preemptively discharge the energy safely. A burst of steam erupted beneath the master, lifting him slightly. And Van Helsing seized the moment, closing the distance. He swung his sword, slicing along the arcane armor and pulsing his gauntlet to destabilize the master's energy reserves. The master stumbled, narrowly regaining balance, cursing under his breath. "You fight well," the master hissed, voice layered with distortion, "but the labyrinth was only a fraction of my design." He triggered a hidden mechanism. The floor tilted violently, sending rotating blades into Van Helsing's path. He rolled to safety, kicking aside debris while simultaneously pulsing a nearby conduit, causing the blades to jam mid-rotation. A minor supernatural sentinel emerged from a hidden compartment, its form twisted with metallic and magical augmentation. Van Helsing ducked, rolled, and struck with precision, disabling both the construct and the arcane energy sustaining it. Sparks flew, mingling with the hiss of steam and the glow of disrupted runes. "Your tricks are numerous," he muttered, "but not endless." The master's eyes blazed with fury. "You underestimate me at every turn," he snarled, firing a concentrated bolt of arcane energy. Van Helsing dove to the side, sword deflecting the beam into a wall, where it exploded harmlessly. Every strike, every counter, reflected the centuries of training he had endured, the blend of intuition, strategy, and sheer resilience that made him a hunter of monsters, a solver of enigmas, and a survivor of impossible odds. Chains swung, gears rotated. Steam vented and glyphs flared, each element acting both independently and in concert to ensnare the intruder. Van Helsing exploited every weakness, timing pulses to neutralize energy sources, calculating arcs of mechanical hazards, and using walls and debris to block attacks. Each movement was a combination of martial prowess and tactical calculation, honed over lifetimes of combat. "Enough games," the master hissed, summoning a quadrupedal construct bristling with blades and runes. "Face me finally." Van Helsing rolled beneath the first swipe, pulsing the gauntlet to short the runes, and slicing the next limb with his sword. Sparks and mist erupted, coating the chamber in a haze of energy and metal. They engaged in a flurry of strikes and counterstrikes, the master exploiting both arcane and mechanical traps to force Van Helsing into defensive maneuvers. Van Helsing responded with a blend of brute force, agility, and calculated pulses of arcane energy, dismantling constructs mid-assault while remaining acutely aware of the master's unpredictable movements. "You endure," the master hissed, stepping back and adjusting a complex mechanism embedded in the wall. Arcane glyphs pulsed along the chamber, forming barriers and activating unseen traps. Van Helsing's monocle illuminated the sequence, revealing the pattern. He rolled under a swinging blade, pulsed the nearest conduit, and leapt to safety, simultaneously sending a shock through the floor to disable the barrier. Minutes stretched into an endless ballet of motion, each movement precise, each strike met with a counter, every pulse from his gauntlet calculated to destabilize the master's devices. Van Helsing's breath came in controlled gasps, muscles straining, eyes scanning constantly. Yet even fatigue could not dull centuries of honed instincts. "You are relentless," the master admitted, voice now tinged with respect and frustration. "But relentlessness alone will not unseat me." He lunged once more, blade aimed at a vital point. Van Helsing sidestepped, sending a pulse into the master's arm mechanism and striking with his sword, a precise hit that fractured plating and disrupted the arcane energy flow. The master staggered, the culmination of every trap, construct, and attack now arrayed in a single, brutal confrontation. Van Helsing adjusted his grip, muscles coiling for one final coordinated assault. With a precise combination of sword strikes and gauntlet pulses, he dismantled the master's defenses, each blow carefully calculated to exploit mechanical weaknesses and magical vulnerabilities simultaneously. The master collapsed, a hiss of arcane energy escaping his final movements. Van Helsing's chest rose and fell heavily, pulse raising, muscles burning but eyes sharp. The labyrinth had tested every skill, every ounce of resilience and intellect he possessed. For a moment silence reigned. broken only by the hiss of cooling steam and the faint sputtering of remaining conduits, he lowered his sword slightly. Gauntlet dimming its final pulse and surveyed the chamber, every construct neutralized, every trap dismantled, every minor supernatural sentinel dispatched. Victory had been won, but the toll was evident, in exhaustion, in the relentless test of reflexes and intellect, and in the knowledge that the master's lair, though conquered, still hinted at dangers yet unseen. The final master lay defeated, collapsed among shattered constructs and flickering glyphs. The chamber still hissed with residual steam, and the acrid tang of burnt metal and scorched arcane residue filled the air. Van Helsing's chest rose and fell rapidly, muscles trembling from the relentless combat, yet his eyes remained sharp, scanning the room for lingering threats. Every pulse of residual energy, every faint hum from damaged machinery could conceal a hidden danger. He moved cautiously, stepping over the fallen constructs and shattered mechanisms, his mechanical sword still humming faintly from the last strike. "It is done," he muttered, voice low, though the echo of the master's taunt seemed to linger in the chamber. Finally done, yet he knew better. Even defeated, the master's labyrinth was designed to outlast him, to test him until every ounce of skill and endurance had been drained. From a shadowed alcove, a minor supernatural sentinel stirred, its body twisted with metallic augmentations and glowing runes. Van Helsing's gauntlet discharged a pulse, neutralizing the residual arcane energy and collapsing the sentinel into a heap of smoking metal. Sparks sizzled across the floor, mingling with the hiss of steam from ruptured conduits. "Every step anticipated," Van Helsing muttered, wiping sweat from his brow, and yet nothing remained unaccounted for. He paused near the center of the chamber, kneeling to inspect the master's devices. Arcane cores, mechanical constructs, and hidden compartments littered the floor, many still flickering with residual energy. "You left a lot of toys behind," he said quietly, almost conversationally, speaking to the empty air where the master's presence had loomed. "Not that I mind cleaning them up." A flick of his wrist sent a calibrated pulse through a nearby conduit, disabling a hidden tripwire that might have caught him off guard. Van Helsing's gaze shifted to the upper galleries, where conduits and elevated platforms snaked through the chamber. A faint movement caught his eye. A small quadrupedal construct had survived the initial assault, its clawed limbs twitching as it attempted to stabilize itself. Without hesitation, Van Helsing leapt across debris, gauntlet discharging a pulse that overloaded the construct's circuits, reducing it to a lifeless heap. The echo of metal collapsing and energy sputtering was almost ceremonial, the final act in a chamber that had demanded every ounce of his skill. "Cunning and cruel but finite," Van Helsing murmured, surveying the chaos. "You could manipulate machines, monsters, and men alike, but not me." He adjusted the lenses of his mechanical monocle, scanning for lingering arcane glyphs or traps. Every pulse, every faint glimmer of magic, was catalogued in his mind, a mental map of the master's influence, precise and unyielding. Beyond the chamber, the faint sounds of movement drew his attention. Escaped monsters, smaller constructs, and minor supernatural creatures scuttled in the shadows, attempting to flee the carnage. Van Helsing acted swiftly, gauntlet discharging pulses, sword sweeping in arcs that shattered metal limbs and severed taloned appendages. Each strike was measured, conserving energy while ensuring total neutralization. One particularly agile construct leapt toward him, claws extended. A quick roll, a pulse, and the threat was ended before it could land. "Persistent," Van Helsing said quietly, almost admiringly, as if speaking to the creatures themselves. "But persistence does not equal victory." He paused to catch his breath, listening intently to the distant echoes that reverberated through the labyrinth. The lair was not silent. Hidden devices still hummed faintly, glyphs flickered with residual magic, and somewhere deeper, the machinery of the master's design continued its ceaseless rhythm. Every sound was a potential threat, every shadow a possible ambush. Van Helsing's senses, honed over centuries, absorbed each detail. Even now, victory was tempered by caution. From the far end of the chamber, a faint metallic clatter indicated a larger escape device, one of the master's experimental hybrids. It charged forward with mechanical precision, limbs spinning and blades extended. Van Helsing rolled beneath its first swing, slashing upward with his mechanical sword while sending a concentrated pulse through his gauntlet to disrupt the arcane energy powering its limbs. Sparks and smoke filled the chamber as the construct collapsed, finally still. "I hope you enjoyed the gauntlet," Van Helsing muttered under his breath, stepping over the debris. His eyes fell on a hidden panel along the wall, faintly illuminated by a flickering glyph. The panel housed additional mechanisms, tripwires, arcane traps, and a cluster of smaller constructs designed to ambush any intruder. With precise pulses from his gauntlet, he disabled the devices one by one, dismantling the hidden threats with surgical efficiency. Even as he cleared the chamber, Van Helsing's mind worked ahead, considering the Countess. Securing her safety was paramount, but he knew that the organization's influence had been deeply embedded. One lair destroyed did not erase decades of manipulation, recruitment, and hidden operations. Temporary safety, he murmured. That is all I can guarantee. For now, the faint echo of the Master's voice, residual and recorded through the labyrinth's devices, hissed mockingly through a hidden speaker. You think it ends here. You are merely scratching the surface. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed, and his jaw tightened. Perhaps, he replied aloud, voice low and firm, but I will scratch every surface if I must. He moved toward the lair's exit, noting the uneven floor, scattered debris, and residual arcane traps. Each step was deliberate, scanning for glyphs, hidden devices, or lingering guardians. A mechanical spider scuttled across the floor toward him, claws scraping metal. A flick of his gauntlet sent a disabling pulse through its joints, and it collapsed with a high-pitched squeal of overloaded circuits. Another pulse, and a hidden wire that could have triggered a floor trap was neutralized. Pausing at the exit, Van Helsing allowed himself a brief moment to survey the chamber in its entirety. Broken constructs, shattered glyphs, and the ruined machinery formed a twisted tableau, a testament to the Master's ingenuity and the toll it took on anyone attempting to survive. Impressive, he murmured quietly, but predictable in the end. A subtle hiss from behind alerted him to one final threat. A small serpent-like construct slithered from a shadowed recess, its metallic body glinting with residual energy. Van Helsing's sword arced in a precise strike, slicing the creature in two, while his gauntlet sent a calibrated pulse through the residue to prevent any delayed magical reaction. The chamber was finally silent. He exhaled slowly, muscles aching, joints stiff from the relentless battle. His sword still hummed faintly from the gauntlet's energy, and his monocle highlighted residual traces of arcane energy fading across the walls and floor. Every construct, every minor guardian, every trap had been accounted for or neutralized. Yet Van Helsing knew that the Master's organization, its network of devices, monsters, and human agents, extended beyond the lair. Temporary safety, he repeated, stepping through the exit into the dim light beyond. The Countess would be secure, for now, shielded from the immediate reach of the Master's machinations. But his instincts, honed through centuries of pursuit and combat, warned that shadows lingered. Every device dismantled, every creature neutralized, was only a single victory in an ongoing war. Van Helsing adjusted the lenses of his monocle, scanning the corridor ahead. The distant hum of machinery suggested that other hidden systems might still operate, and faint residual glyphs shimmered along the walls. The path never truly ends, he muttered. One victory does not erase centuries of cunning. The monsters, the traps, the organization, they remain. He paused to catch his breath, feeling the toll of the encounter settle into his bones. The chamber behind him, though conquered, was a reminder of the relentless nature of the Third Master's genius. Each trap, construct, and arcane ward had tested not just his reflexes, but his intellect, endurance, and foresight. Even in victory, the price was evident, yet the path forward demanded vigilance, strategy, and the unwavering resolve to confront threats before they could strike. A soft hiss of displaced air from a nearby conduit reminded him that even silence could harbor danger. He tightened his grip on his sword, feeling the familiar weight of his gauntlet against his forearm, and allowed himself a single thought. Survival was only temporary, victory was only partial, and the shadows that stalked the world would never relent. Countess, he whispered, voice barely audible, you are safe for now, but I will not let the darkness claim you, not while I still draw breath. He moved forward, stepping carefully into the next corridor, eyes sharp, mind alert, every muscle coiled for what lay ahead. The lair behind him, though conquered, was only a single node in a network of threats. The battle had been won, but the war, the endless dance with monsters, machines, and men, continued. Every step reinforced the truth Van Helsing had always known. Vigilance, skill, and intellect were the only shields against the shadows. The lair lay in ruin behind him, machinery sparking and twisted, arcane glyphs shattered and smoking, yet the remnants of the organization lingered like ghosts. The masters were gone, every one, but their influence persisted, scattered in half-activated devices, rogue constructs, and minor supernatural threats still prowling the corridors. Each ruin, each lingering pulse of arcane energy reminded him that the battle might be won. But the war had not ended. Van Helsing moved carefully through the wreckage, stepping over a toppled clockwork sentinel whose gears still spun feebly, releasing hisses of steam. "No time to celebrate," he muttered, voice low but steady, his mechanical gauntlet adjusting to trace faint energy signatures left in the wake of the defeated master. Sparks flared as residual magic from shattered glyphs tickled the metal. A small scuttling construct, no larger than a terrier but lined with jagged brass edges, darted from the shadows. Van Helsing's reflexes were instantaneous. A pulse from the gauntlet disabled its energy core, leaving it inert. He paused to catch his breath, scanning the labyrinthine chamber one last time. The residual machinery groaned, each vented puff of steam a reminder that the industrial maze still possessed lethal potential. "They thought they could hide it all," he said aloud, voice echoing against steel walls, "but nothing survives centuries of observation and careful study." A faint chuckle, mechanical and distorted, responded from a hidden speaker somewhere deeper in the ruins. "Observation alone won't save you, Hunter," it hissed. Van Helsing's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps," he replied, "but it will keep me alive long enough to warn the Countess." Turning his attention toward the shattered exit, Van Helsing mapped the safest route back through the wreckage. Noting unstable scaffolding, live arcane traps, and damaged machinery still capable of injury, each step was deliberate. A flicker of movement drew his gaze. A partially intact automaton, gears grinding, attempting to reset itself for attack. Van Helsing's mechanical sword sliced through the air in a clean arc, severing a limb and then pulsing his gauntlet to overload the construct's circuits, leaving it smoking and inert. His mind was already planning the journey back. The Countess's safety depended on his survival, but the organization's disruption meant he no longer had the infrastructure that had previously tracked and cataloged monsters. The data, the intelligence, the carefully maintained networks, all gone. Now every hunt would be personal, every encounter isolated, every advantage previously taken for granted had vanished. The corridor ahead opened onto a series of vertical shafts, rising through the layer like the skeleton of some enormous industrial beast. Van Helsing scaled the first metal ladder, the vibrations of the ruined machinery beneath him reverberating through his arms. Steam vents hissed unpredictably, scalding hot, forcing him to time his ascent carefully. As he reached a landing, he caught sight of a minor supernatural sentinel, its eyes glowing faintly, perched on a beam like a predator waiting to strike. Van Helsing whispered, "I see you, not enough to surprise me." A pulse from his gauntlet sent a web of electrical energy cascading over the sentinel, disabling its arcane core. Sparks rained down, and the creature collapsed silently into the shadows below. He paused, catching his breath and allowing his augmented vision to sweep the area. Mechanical tracers pulsed faintly, marking potential hazards. "So many of them left behind," he muttered, noting that even after the master's defeat, the organization's reach lingered like a shadow. Descending into another chamber, Van Helsing encountered a partially destroyed mapping console, its arcane interfaces flickering intermittently. Data logs, fragmented and corrupted, blinked across the display. He scanned the remnants, extracting what he could. Locations of previously observed monster activity, details of construct programming, and notes on magical wards. Though incomplete, it provided a critical starting point for the hunts to come. "They tried to hide everything," he said under his breath, "but even fragments tell a story." A sudden metallic screech echoed from above. Van Helsing's eyes tracked movement along the ceiling beams. A trio of clockwork spiders, each bristling with spinning blades, descended on cable lines. With precise timing, he threw an arcane pulse grenade, sending them into a tangle of their own webs. Sparks flew, metal collided with metal, and he watched them collapse into the shadows, motionless. "Efficiency in the chaos," he muttered. Every remaining hazard, every lingering trap, became both a reminder of the past danger and a test of his endurance. Emerging into the final corridor, he paused. The exit was ahead, but the path was strewn with debris, fallen machinery, and scattered wards still faintly pulsing with residual magic. Each step forward required meticulous attention. "Nothing left unguarded," he muttered. A faint whisper carried along the ventilation ducts, distorted. "You think this is over?" Van Helsing's gaze swept the shadows. "It never ends," he replied softly. As he made his way toward the main exit, he reflected on the consequences of the master's defeat. The Countess would be safe for now, but her protection depended on him. And the disrupted organization's remnants were unpredictable. Rogue constructs, partially controlled supernatural entities, and unclaimed arcane devices now wandered unchecked. The city itself was littered with danger, and Van Helsing would have to rebuild intelligence networks from scratch if he wished to keep the threat contained. A distant hiss drew him toward a side passage. A semi-formed monster caught between worlds by the residual energy of the lair lunged at him. Van Helsing sidestepped, slashing with his mechanical sword, then pulsed his gauntlet to sever its ethereal connection. The creature vanished with a scream, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air. Even half-formed, still deadly, he muttered. His eyes swept the corridor, noting the arcane residue, the jagged metal, the uneven footing. Every advantage had to be recalculated in this new, unpredictable reality. Finally, Van Helsing reached the top of a ruined stairwell, the main exit in sight. The evening sky stretched overhead, thick with smoke and haze from the industrial sprawl, but it represented freedom and a return to responsibility. Yet even as he stepped out, his eyes never left the surrounding streets. The organization might be disrupted, the masters defeated, but its influence lingered, and monsters still roamed. Every instinct screamed that the hunt was far from over. He paused atop the stairwell, breathing heavily, wiping sweat from his brow. "Countess," he muttered, voice low but resolute. "The path is clear for now, but the shadows remain." Every lesson learned in the gauntlet of traps, constructs, and monsters had sharpened him, but it had also revealed the immense isolation ahead. The organization's data, once centralized and reliable, was now scattered and incomplete. Survival strategy and intellect would be tested more than ever in the coming days. A mechanical whir drew his attention to a nearby alley. Two rogue constructs, remnants of a defensive grid, emerged, their gears grinding. Van Helsing grinned faintly, exhaling sharply. "And so it begins again," he said, rolling into combat. His gauntlet flared, sending arcs of energy across the machines, while his sword carved precise lines through the metal limbs. Sparks flew, metal screamed, and within moments the constructs lay disabled. Each action, each narrowly avoided threat, and each observation reinforced the truth Van Helsing had known for centuries. Victory was never absolute. Though the masters were defeated, the organization's remnants and the monsters it had catalogued remained. His journey back to the Countess would be fraught with danger, and the reconstruction of intelligence networks would fall entirely on him. The path ahead was isolated, perilous, and demanding, but necessary. Stepping fully into the open street, he surveyed the city. Fires burned faintly in the distance, and the fog of industry mingled with smoke from collapsed machinery. Van Helsing's mechanical monocle traced hidden arcane traces, confirming that no traps had been left fully active to follow him. "Temporary safety," he muttered, "but a fleeting reprieve. The hunt continues." With that, he began the careful journey back through the ruined industrial district, every step deliberate, senses alert. The Countess awaited news, but first he would navigate the remnants of the lair, document what he could, and prepare for the inevitable challenges the organization's scattered remnants and remaining monsters would bring. Every breath, every calculated movement, every strike, and every observation had brought him here, and would.
Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, comment or review, and tell your friends if you liked it. All my books are available from Amazon and other book retailers. Buy an ebook and show your support.